So, welcome everyone to another episode of the Gin and Tonic Show. Today we will be discussing the origins of the Quran, precursors, writings that are eerily similar to stories and things that appear in the Quran. Who copied who? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? But they're going to get a little bit off topic. Oh, by the way, I'm Almighty Atheismo. We will be taking callers, as always. All callers are advised that this is recorded for upload on YouTube and is being streamed live on Blog TV. Also joining with me is Ali of Arab Atheist Broadcasting. Thank you for joining us. But before we get to our main topic, just go ahead and tell them what happened.
Hey, by the way, just so that you know, I'm taking up pretty much the entire screen on
Yeah,
Blog
I
TV.
know. It's because...
Okay.
Yeah, the first thing he's like, I don't know if I want to appear on camera. I got a real bohemian thing going on. I don't know how to...
Do you wanna just wait for
I don't know how to fix that.
You can't fix it because I think you can either drag and make your picture bigger.
Yeah.
Or we can let somebody else do it. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. So let's. I guess I could just tell people about the thing that I wanted to say. First thing is basically, as Atheismo mentioned, that I'm with Arab Atheist Broadcasting, and on the show we have a blogger by the name of Abdul Aziz Mohamed al-Baz, and Abdul Aziz is an Egyptian. He lives in Kuwait. And as of December 31st, he has been jailed in Kuwait for blasphemy. So basically what I'm asking people to do is, and I'll post the link now in the chat, is to go onto this Facebook page. Obviously, like the Facebook page, there's a petition for you to sign, and also if you can share this information with everybody you know, because basically we're trying to generate pressure to try to force the Kuwaiti government into letting him go, or shaming them into letting him go, I guess is the thing that we're talking about. Kuwait is a country that has been shown in the past to be susceptible to this type of pressure. They have this idea of themselves as being progressive, at least more progressive than most. And so we think that basically if enough more noise is made about how barbaric this whole blasphemy thing is, that maybe they will get their sense about them and maybe let him go. So I've posted the link in the chat. If you please can, go like the page, sign the petition, and share this with everybody you know, and tell them to do the same. And that's basically the thing that I wanted to plug.
So anyway, Kling was the one who selected the topic of Quranic precursors, and apparently he knew a lot about it. I don't think that Ali or myself are really experts in this region. We could talk, but before the show we were talking about politics. I think that people might, or I mean at least recent events. We could get down to that before Kling shows up, because Egypt is, according to you, falling apart.
Yeah, that's it's obviously, I'm sure almost everybody who listens to this show would probably know that we had this so-called revolution on the 25th of 2011, and basically it hasn't been a revolution. At best it was a revolt, and it seems to... Well, I mean, let's just say not gone in the way of democracy and all these Arab Spring. It's all bullshit. None of it's true. The thing has gone completely awry, and it's getting worse and worse every day. So the anniversary was yesterday, the 25th, and basically Egypt has been on fire since yesterday. Governorate buildings have been set on fire. Muslim Brotherhood headquarters have been set on fire. Different police stations, schools have been set on fire. People are shooting at each other. There's basically a street war in at least a few governorates. And so, you know, when people talk about the Arab Spring, it's bullshit. There wasn't a spring. This thing is a disaster, and it's getting worse every day. So that's basically my take, at least on what's happening in Egypt right now. And basically, there's just a bunch of kids who I mean, honestly, do want freedom and things like that. But the problem is that the Egyptians voted for these people. And so everything they do now is pretty much useless, because unless they want to go back to ruling by the iron fist and just them be the dictator or them be the ruler, there's no use in any of this, because they're just going to re-vote these Islamists back in again. It's obviously ridiculous to think that, you know, I think that's the definition of a madman, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's basically what's happening now. They think that if they topple Mohamed Morsi, that somehow magically people will vote for somebody with a little bit more sense. And that's obviously not the case. They're just going to vote for these idiots again, maybe even worse next time. So that's my take on it, anyways.
See, I wonder if they had it to do again, would they bide their time until the population became more progressive, or is this just in a sense inevitable if they want any permanent change? Is this like the reign of terror during the French Revolution? Is it just a step that is unfortunately necessary?
I mean, it at least seems that way. I mean, obviously, it's easy to look back and say, yeah, you know, all this stuff now. But when you think about it, during Mubarak's era, anyways, things have gotten progressively worse. I mean, so a dictatorship wasn't exactly the solution either, was it? Because if you look at Egypt in the 50s and after that revolution, things weren't so bad. I mean, Egypt was largely progressive, looked like any, you know, it could have been anywhere in Europe at the time. I mean, the beaches were full of naked women, and you know, it looked pretty much like, you know, black and white movies did here. They looked the same over there. It was just a different language. And so I don't know. It's kind of tough to see how you could get out of what's going on now, because basically, I mean, now that I think about it, Mubarak was absolutely right. It was either him or the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And people were like, no, that's not true. That's not true. Those were the actual choices. Yeah. And now we can say that, but of course, at the time, I was the first one to say, nope, that's not true.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was, you know, proven that I'm an absolute idiot when it comes to this type of stuff.
Well,
so
yeah, I remember almost the exact conversation that you and I had, and we were of the same mind. You were like, well, I think we've definitely seen that these the current dictatorships are not the answer. And I said, you know, yeah, preach it on the mountain. And we were both just, I mean, so far, we've been dead wrong. But I mean, and then the counter to that, actually, even to people who will admit that was the situation, will say that. That was Mubarak's plan all along, was to set up the situation. You know.
Okay, and so then you'd have to say that these liberals are playing out Mubarak's plan. I mean, how does this fit in, right? Because it wasn't Mubarak's plan to get all these people to go and vote for the Muslim Brotherhood, was it? I mean, he had nothing to do with that. The guy's been in jail. I mean, there's no way he could have influenced the electorate in that way. When you actually, honestly, to be honest here, the liberals and the progressives have turned out to be just a bunch of bickering idiots. And instead of becoming a coalition and introducing something useful, like a way to get out of all these problems, they've been at each other's throats. And basically they've all been fighting over scraps of different parliamentary seats and things like that, instead of, you know, putting aside their own personal interests and just playing their part until things get a little bit better. So is that Mubarak's fault too? I mean, what the hell does Mubarak have to do with any of this, right? I mean, Mubarak didn't tell these people to bicker and become these basically mob of childish idiots running around. That wasn't. He didn't do that. They did that to themselves.
There's a very similar pattern in the Palestinian elections where, the Islamists were just much more unified, and the more moderate elements were just a checkerboard of different small parties, and then they got just swept aside.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically exactly what's happened. And now, of course, they've created this opposition front group, and it's a disaster. After like the first few meetings, there's footage of one of the major figures standing outside, yelling and screaming and swearing at one of the other major figures. And they get out of their meetings, and everybody wants to call a television station and tell them everything that's happened and all the fights that have happened. I mean, instead of it's a disaster basically, and I mean, you can definitely blame Mubarak for where we are as far as education and things like that are concerned, but you certainly couldn't blame him for that. I mean, I'm really starting to feel extremely sympathetic to him in a way, because people are pushing all the stuff as it's his fault. But what has he done? I mean, after he's been gone, you can't blame him for the stuff that you're doing now. I mean, it's absurd to say, "Oh, Mubarak did this to us." Mubarak's nowhere to be found. You did this to yourself. And if they succeed, which I don't think is going to happen, in getting rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, at least momentarily, nothing's going to change. They're just going to be voted back in again.
Yeah, the people in the country are just going to say, "Well, round two."
Yeah, it's absurd. Yeah. That's it. That's good. I'll talk to myself for a while. All right. So, any questions in the chat, or? No. Well, Klingschor was supposed to be on today. We were supposed to be talking about. I'm sure. I don't know if you guys were here and heard, but we're supposed to be talking about Islam and pre-Islamic origins, I guess, of some of the text and all the different tenets of Islam. And I actually, I'm not. I mean, I don't know very much about pre-Islamic stuff. Almost everything I know about Islam is from an Islamic narrative. But I did read a book written by a guy called Robert Wright, and I usually don't agree with the guy. I think that he's kind of a crackpot a little bit. But I will recommend this one book. It's called The Evolution of God. It's a good book, but keep in mind this guy's a crackpot, and the conclusions that he makes, based on the very accurate historical information that he gives, are pretty much garbage. So just keep that in mind when you read that book, but it's very useful. He's got this whole section on Islam, and he's got his own little pet theory about Islam and its relation to Judaism and things like that, and it's plausible. I mean, obviously, it's pretty tough to make these kinds of things out this far removed from the actual events, but it's an interesting read on the situation and what may have happened.
Well, I think when you first approach the religious doctrine, it becomes glaringly apparent that it's that the religion is syncretic, that he took local and imported beliefs and mashed them together. It's like there's angels and demons, from the Abrahamic tradition, and then let's throw in jinn, because everybody in our neighborhood believes in jinn. So even though they never appear anywhere in the other Abrahamic traditions, we just can't tell people that there are no jinn. So fine, the Quran's going to have angels, demons, and jinn, and then the line between jinn and demons is going to be blurred a little bit. So right off the bat, it just seems like he just sort of mashed together local legends and lore and Abrahamic stuff coming from up north.
Yeah, that's kind of what this pet theory is about. Is basically he says Mohamed basically he looks at it from a political perspective. He says that basically Mohammed he doesn't really talk about his sincerity or his non-sincerity, but he says basically that what he did was he knew that there was a lot of Jewish tribes. He knew that there was a lot of Christians in Yemen and in Syria and in the Byzantine Empire at the time, and the polytheists in the Arabian Peninsula. And so basically what he did was he used the Kaaba, which was one of the most important things for the polytheists in the area at the time, and used Jewish lore to connect the Arabs to Abraham through Ismail and all this other garbage. And basically his point is that what he tried to do was to make it so that it would appeal to as many people in the area as possible by doing all these different things, by telling the Jews that this is a religion of Abraham, and telling the Christians that we believe that Jesus was a real prophet and was a Messiah, and all this other stuff, and then telling the polytheists, oh, the Kaaba is really important in all this.
Yeah.
And basically he used this to build a coalition that he then, that he eventually did build, because,
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, he definitely was successful in building some sort of coalition, at least at the beginning, if it later turned out to be a bloody conquest. But in the beginning, he did succeed in pulling some of the Christians to him, pulling some of the Jews to him. And again, this is all based on Islamic sources. The non-Islamic sources that from what I understand, that depict anything about the beginnings of Islam don't happen for quite a while after they're already spread. And so it's kind of difficult to see what actually really did happen. For all we know, this whole thing could have been made up. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a good case to be made that they did all the conquest and then they sat down and thought, okay, now we need to create a mythology. And they sat down and actually did it, with some thought put to it, some intellect behind it. But
Well, I always got the feeling that Mohamed started off relatively naive, and he's like, he really thought he could just convert people by word of mouth. And at some point he got really frustrated and just said, fuck it, we'll just go around with a band of, warriors and fuck people up. And it worked, it was a lot more effective at that point, Although, you see this with a lot of, I'm going to use the word cult, but I don't mean it just in a pejorative sense. I'm just talking about small religious sects around a single person. You see this with a lot of cults, is that they go through their early phases are less bizarre. They start off as relatively innocuous, and then later on, there's kind of a more. It seems like there's this critical mass that the group reaches, where it stops recruiting people just by volunteers, and then that's when they start to sort of make it a gated community, and they start to become a little bit more, you know what I mean? Like they'll start off just a bunch of rednecks, in the same trailer park, and then the next thing you know, they're all buying guns, they're cutting off communication with the outsiders, So maybe it's just a natural phase that small new religions go through if they're, of that disposition,
yeah, in a few months they're drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you believe the actual story that's traditionally told in Muslim lore, then that is what it seems like. It seems. I mean, I guess there's a case to be made. And why would you make it seem so obviously political? Meek and mild when he was in the minority, and then oppressive when it's in the majority. If you could have done it in another way,
right?
So I guess you could give that some veracity, but I honestly, you're right. If we take those sources, it does seem that is how it starts out. Meek and mild, he's telling people, be nice, talk to the Christians and the Jews only with kindness, and if you disagree, then just leave them alone, and talk to these people nicely, and it's all meek and mild, to steal somebody else's phrase. And then as soon as he goes to Medina, and now he's got a big enough army, it's time to start invading people, and and taking all their money and all their women and all that stuff that comes on later. So in that sense, it does follow the typical beginning of a cult and then a flourishing into a major religion.
Yeah. Now, and the thing is, if you're sort of an armchair critic of religion like us, we would point to we would point to the difference in disposition of the message as strong evidence that it's of earthly origin. Because why would God's personality change, or why would God's confidence wax and wane? You know what I mean? But what actually, the fact that those the early verses are still there is a tremendous boon to the more liberal Muslim apologists who are like, look, here's a verse that is very diplomatic, and that is aggravating, because then you say, well, here's a verse that says eviscerate him or whatever, and they'll say, well, you're cherry picking. But I mean, really, if you're going to be fair, you're going to say, look, there's quite plausible that both those sets of verses are legit, but they're definitely going on the down escalator toward as he gains power and he increasingly doesn't answer to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question from somebody in the chat. I don't know if I should mention the name or not, but I'll just read the question. It's, do you think Mohammed propagated the religious or the political Islam as a statesman or a prophet? Basically, he's asking if Mohammed was a political leader or a prophet. I mean, he definitely was a political leader at some point. I mean, when you become the head of the state, I mean, it's hard to say you're not a political leader at that point. How he started out, it seems, again, if you believe the lore, which I mean, there are good reasons why you would, then it seems that he may have started out sincerely as just a demented guy who thought he really was hearing stuff from somewhere else, and as is human nature, you can get your brain to tell you things that you believe in, but that really kind of serve your purpose anyways, right? I mean, there's nothing that says that you could really be having visions, right, like hallucinations, but these hallucinations serve your political interest. Yeah. Right? I mean, that's possible. I don't know if that's actually, if that's what happened, but as far as I can tell from the story as it goes, he was a political leader, and when people say, "Oh, it's the politicization of Islam," it's kind of hard to argue against politicizing Islam, considering the Prophet and the Khulafa ar-Rashidin, the best people after the Prophet, were all political leaders. They were statesmen, and so I kind of stand aghast at people, at Muslims anyways, who say, "Oh, religion shouldn't get involved in politics." But your Prophet was he was a head of state. The people that you hold up to be the best people after him were all heads of state. As a matter of fact, they all killed each other over power. And so Muhammad, obviously, I don't know if it was intended or not, but he certainly was a political figure. He certainly was a statesman, and the religion that he built has a lot of politics in it. It has a lot of political statements. It talks a lot about these kinds of things. And it's kind of hard to not look at that and think, oh yeah, this absolutely has got nothing to do with politics. I mean, I don't know what reading you'd have to. I don't know how much cherry picking you'd have to do to get rid of that. But as far as I can see it, seems like it's hard to make the argument that Islam is not political or Muhammad wasn't a politician or a statesman.
Well, it seems like any religion, any Abrahamic religion, certainly, it's just on a collision course with the political structure. Because if you're saying, okay, this is the one true way, it must become dominant in the world. It must be the dominant force in the world because the God who this religion is worshiping, he owns everything. He's master of. I mean, how? And then you'll hear a lot of conservative Christians here in the U.S. Say, oh well, we're living in sin because we're not doing things God's way. If we would just completely override our political structure with a theocracy if we were really serious. They make noises like that, but then there isn't a very serious push because in the West, of course, even many members of religions quietly acknowledge that the separation between church and state has worked out pretty well.
Well, I mean, you can make a case that Jesus was never a political leader. He was never a statesman. And that you can make that case, right? You couldn't do the same with, like, let's say, a Moses or a Muhammad, because they were leaders of nation. I mean, like I said, this is, you know, I really don't care what they believe, honestly. To be honest with you, to me, as far as I'm concerned, they can do whatever the hell they want, right? But the way I see it, and I understand why most Muslims would think that you need Sharia law and that you need to have a caliphate and that the religion needs to rule, because if you read the text that they're supposedly following, it's pretty obvious that that's what's supposed to take place if you buy the premise that this is true, right? Where you couldn't, I don't see the exact same line of reasoning from Jesus to religion ruling the country, right? So, I mean, obviously, it becomes a little bit different later on with Constantine and the Catholic Church and all that other stuff. But as far as Jesus himself was concerned, or at least the myth around Jesus, he was never a politician. He was never a statesman, and I don't see, you know, I don't see any problem with somebody taking Christianity and saying, well, this isn't supposed to be politics.
Yeah.
Right? I can see somebody making that argument, and I might be able to listen to it, you know, if you can sufficiently then go around and say, you know, how you deal with some of the problematic stuff with the edicts and things that you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And how that doesn't count as religion being involved in the government. But you could make a case there. I just don't see how you can make that same case for Muhammad or his followers, because their whole thing was that they were a state. They were a political state.
Victims of their own success, really. I mean, if we assume Jesus to be a historical figure, whatever his plans were, he got killed before he could reach the same phase that Muhammad enjoyed later. You know, I mean, who knows? But the thing is, you know, if from a military and political perspective, you know, Jesus never took off. You know what I mean? They have the doctrine that okay, well, it was a necessary sacrifice and blah blah blah. Yeah, I don't know how they buy that doctrine. I mean, let's face it. You know, he opposed the opposition, and the opposition responded. I mean, you know, the system responded just by killing a troublemaker, and that's how the story, if it were honestly told, would be. Again, assuming if he was an historical character. So, Muhammad did well by not being executed by the Meccan pagans in the first phase of his career, the way Jesus was executed by his political and religious enemies. So yeah, I mean, Christians can make the argument that okay, Jesus was this voice in the wilderness, like, and he never took a. I mean, maybe early Christians just couldn't envision themselves being that strong since they were so against the ropes for so long.
Actually, this kind of has to do with the original topic of the show, and it's again, I apologize, by the way, for my disheveled looks.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. I just turned my head to the side and saw that I look like some sort of a turkey, and so basically, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but I'm not very familiar with it either. But I was rereading something that I'd read a while ago, and this is the same book that I was talking about earlier. It's called The Evolution of God, and it was saying that there are actually two different accounts of the Abraham story in the Jewish texts. That the first account was that Abraham took Hagar as a concubine, and when she got pregnant, she was driven off to the desert to have Ishmael on her own, and the proclamation is that this man will wander around like an ass for all his days. And basically, this was the mythology that the Jews used to say that the Arabs were basically inferior, much more inferior than they are. And they actually called the tribes near Israel, the Arabs, the Ismailites or the Ishmaelites. but later on, when the Persians invaded, apparently, and then they were in charge, and their problem was with the Egyptians. That what they wanted the Jews and the Arabs to get along, so that way the Arabs, if they felt disparaged, didn't go and make and ally themselves with the Egyptians against the Persians and the Israelites. And so, from this hypothesis that's being espoused by Robert Wright, that basically he then coerced the source P, which is, I think, the priestly source in the Jewish books, to write another version of the Abraham story, where Hagar was actually Abraham's wife, and Ismail was Abraham's beloved son, and then another proclamation that he will make Ismail many, and he will make nations out of him, and there will be 12 tribes and all this other crap. And so basically, Mohamed made use of the second version, the version that's in source P, to infuse into the mythology about how important Arabs are. He drew a direct, honorable line, if you will, for the Arabs from Abraham, using the second source, where most Jews would obviously take the first source as being the one that they tend to believe more, that Isaac was much better than Ishmael, and Ishmael was supposed to be an ass or whatever, and that he would make the covenant with Isaac. So I don't know if that helps at all, but it seems that Muhammad was able to use some of the Jewish lore, and it wasn't really anything. I mean, they say that he came and corrected the books, right?
Yeah.
But he really just used a different version of the story in the same book. It wasn't anything revolutionary, if you will.
It's like a fan fiction writer. It's like if I knew this one person wrote this long fanfic based in the same universe as the Chronicles of Narnia, and it used like the same characters but in new stories, and it's like I get there's a whole underground market for that kind of thing, and religions do the same thing all the time. It's just like, okay, well, I'll use. I mean, yeah, it's like the angels, demons, and jinn. It's like, okay, we'll have a crossover, like the Jetsons and the Flintstones. We'll have the jinn from the Arabian pagans, and then the angels and the demons. That's the funny thing is, I think I've said that, like most things on the show, I've said it before. It's amazing how a foreign religion always seems stranger. Even, like I said, raised around Christians, genies will always seem weirder than angels and demons, but they shouldn't. They shouldn't. I mean, how is a guy in a white robe with dove wings coming out of his back any more or less strange? And yet you got these cocky Christians who'll be like, look at these silly Muslims. Look what they believe in. They believe in a guy with like a tail of a wisp of smoke, or genies and the lamps. How ridiculous. But angels and demons, dove-winged human beings and gargoyles, that's perfectly reasonable and rational.
No, it's you're right, because it really shouldn't, and obviously Christians aren't the only ones that do that, right? Because you always hear Muslims say, the Christians, they're crazy. They have three gods, and it's it's the Father and the Son. They always make a big deal about this three God thing. But when you go then and you read stuff like, for instance, if a fly falls into your tea, then there's magic poison and antidotes in the fly, so you should dip the entire fly in your tea, and then they see that as perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the Christians, they've got the crazy stuff, and so I think that's a pretty common theme all around. And I'm sure the Hindus also think about the idea of one God and go, oh, these crazy! How did we get all the rain and all this, and all this snow? And it's, I just imagine what this kind of what the conversation would be like in India.
Well,
it would be funny.
It seems like a lot of Hindus they get the same line that the Christians do. They say, well, there's one God and he has many different incarnations. So they say there's one God, and then there's many, and that doesn't contradict at all somehow. Um,
So wait a minute. The Hindus, from what I understood, was that they were polytheists. But what
They-
you're saying is that they believe in one God that just looks different in different times.
It has many
Something like
different
that.
incarnations. It's very similar to the Christian talk. There's one God, but there's they say there's one God, but there's three. The Hindus say there's one God and a zillion. You know, and what can you do? They're different forms or incarnations. And then actually, we were talking about fan fiction. You know, what would be a good target for fan fiction is Vishnu, because Vishnu is okay. There's Brahma the creator, Vishnu the defender, and Shiva the destroyer, right? But Vishnu keeps going back to Earth, and every time he goes to Earth, he becomes this famous king or general, and then he slays some group of demons that are troubling the people, and then he grows old and he's taken up again, and then he goes back again. So he does this kind of quantum leap thing, where he has, you know, so it's just that would be a great premise for a fan fiction. I'm just saying, you know, he just keeps like living in different eras, like a mini series, or he just keeps coming back, and you know, why not make him, you know, go into different culture? I'm getting completely off topic on something completely stupid, but sorry, but I mean that. So yeah, so they also do the human incarnation thing in Hinduism. So but when it comes to Islam, that's an even that's another strike against Hinduism, is the whole God becoming man and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's we have obviously strayed far from the topic, but I've run out of information on the topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Because this is supposed to be Klingschor's thing, and honestly, yeah, you can we could talk about all the bad stuff in Islam. I'll give you a lot of that, but
Yeah.
I think I've pretty much run dry on on all the pre-Islamic stuff. I did hear that a lot of the surahs and stuff are just plays on old poems that were around at the time. Ooh, here's something actually interesting. If you look at the way at least Mohammed addresses the kuffar, he never actually has to convince them of Allah, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's always talking about them worshipping other gods with Allah, right? He says mushrikun. He never actually has to convince them that there is an Allah. He just has to convince them that it's only Allah.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting when you think about it, because that really means that they already believed.
Yeah.
I mean, the message wasn't so radical as they make it, as it's made to seem. It seems like, you know, if all these people actually did believe in Allah, that Muhammad really kind of just changed the scenario a little bit, but not hugely. I mean, obviously he added the judgment after the death and stuff like that, but it's really not a radical leap, because if you think about it, he never even has to give him another name. Right? He's always talking to them and saying Allah, and everybody seems to understand what he's talking about. And so just another little interesting tidbit there to think about, because when you think about polytheists, he doesn't tell them, oh, no, they're all fake. He just says, look, one of them is true that you believe in, but the rest of them are fake. I just think that that's an interesting nuance when you think about these things, because I'm going to go back to this book again. Obviously, I'm incredibly influenced by it because I reviewed that chapter today before I decided to go on.
Yeah. I mean, he clearly just sort of stitched things together, or at least clearly from the perspective of someone coming from outside the faith, you know, and looking at. I mean, and there are. I mean, as far as the hadith, they say that there's a lot. I've heard that there are a lot of similarities between like Talmudic literature and stuff that occurs, but I'm not really familiar with Jewish lore outside of the Jewish lore that overlaps with Christianity, because it's just it never really interested me.
Yeah, it's not very interesting in general. Basically what I'm saying is that in this hypothesis that this guy tries to make, he says basically that, as I'm sure almost everybody, at least in this audience, would know, that when somebody has trade relations with a different nation, they usually kind of trade gods back and forth, and if there's a more powerful nation, then its gods will become more prominent in other societies around it, and stuff like that. And the idea is that because Christians were big at the time, right, in Syria, in Yemen, in the Byzantine Empire, which were huge trading partners with the Arabian Peninsula at the time, that the Allah. Oops, off air.
Yeah, I saw that too. Can nobody see and hear us? See, this is why I liked. Okay, Stop said.
I still see and hear you.
Yeah, some people. As long as they can hear.
Okay.
We could restart. But
there's a big
can't hear
Skype
us?
screen.
Can hear but not see.
Yeah. And there's a big Skype screen in the.
Yeah.
Okay. Hear, not see. All right. Now I think we're back now.
Okay.
Okay. Now I completely forgot where the hell I was.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So basically, the idea is that because of the trading partnerships with Yemen and the Byzantine Empire and Syria, that at the time the Arabs had already started worshipping the gods of these people, which would be Allah at the time, because that the word for God in Syriac was Allah, and so it's not a very far leap to start worshipping that God and call it Allah. And so there's an interesting case to be made that Muhammad basically filled the niche, right? These people were already starting to worship the gods of the more advanced civilization. There was already a large influx of Jews and Christians into the area. Jews had lived there for a long time beforehand, but Christians were starting to come in. The person who helped Muhammad interpret all this stuff was a Christian, right? He's a priest, Khadijah's cousin, and so it's again these are all just interesting little tidbits that are of interest when you're talking about what came before Muhammad. How did his revelation come about? You can see it in the way that it really wasn't that far-fetched. The God was already invading the area at the time. There was already Christians at the time. He got help from a Christian to interpret his hallucinations. And then the next natural step is, well, then you start to tie your hallucinations to this God that has already permeated everybody's life.
All right, let's see. There we go. Yeah, I've read that originally the Arab pagans had a pantheon almost similar to a South Asian pantheon, which was you had many different gods, but three at the top, and the moon god was the king, the father. The queen of the gods was the sun, and they liked the sun less because she made things hot, so she was kind of evil. And then the planet Venus was supposed to be the firstborn son and the third of this Trimurti sort of group of gods at the top. And they likely have a somewhat similar origin to the Hindi pantheon, if the Hindi pantheon came about due to one of the out of Africa movements, because humanity came out of Africa primarily two ways. One is mostly near Egypt and along the Sinai, and then the other was following along from the coast from Somalia, then along the edge of the Arab Peninsula, and then finally into India and other places, right? So those are the two main paths. So there's at least some connectivity. But then people also draw possible connections between the Hindi pantheon and the Greco-Roman pantheon, and that goes east to west up north. So who really knows? I mean, there's probably people who have much more expertise in that, but there's at least some opportunity there for the Hindi pantheon and the Arab pagan pantheon to be of a similar or the same source. Kling, you with us?
I certainly am.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, finally.
Look. This time I was
Don't worry
ready.
about it. Don't worry about it.
There was a power failure. There was the power fucking turned off. It was really early in the morning. There was nothing I could do. I'm really sorry. I've got proof. Right, my timer was on correctly. You know, I had all my fucking resources ready. Okay, I'm very sorry. Okay, now have you talked about Zulkarnain yet? Can you give me a lowdown of what you've discussed?
We talked about how little we know about the subject.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. well, lucky I'm here then.
Yeah.
Right,
I give a breakdown of Robert Wright's take in the evolution of God.
Then we talked about how cool it would be.
That was it.
My contribution was talking about a fan fiction where Shiva comes back, like in the modern, and fights gangsters.
Okay, good. Yes, okay, yes. That's okay. Now I'm here. All right. So
Shiva comes back
essentially
as the head of a SEAL Team 6 unit and kills Osama bin Laden.
Well, yeah, I can definitely see how that ties into the origins and the sources of the Quran. All right. I mean, sorry, if Stopspamming was here, he'd have a. All right. He'd have an apoplexy. If I say Quran, yeah. All right, Quran, whatever. Anyway. All right. So, where's my? All right. The sources of the Quran, I'm just going to say Quran because a lot of people seem to take issue with it. The sources of the Quran can be divided into a set of specific sources. So the stories, the legends, the content of the Quran is either from Arabian tradition, Persian tradition, Christian tradition, Jewish tradition, or Greek tradition. These are the traditions that the Quran, or the Quran, whatever, draws upon in its source matter. And basically, I suppose I should go through it and give like a really nice example from each tradition and how it appears in the Quran. So let's see. Sources of the Quran. Okay. So, for example, in Arabian tradition, well, of course, we have right off the bat Allah. Allah was a pre-Islamic Arabian god, and Rahman was a Now, you may not realize this, but in the Quran, originally, the name of Allah wasn't Allah. The name of Allah was Rahman, the Merciful. And Rahman is actually a god from Najd and a god from Yemen. So Rahman was a completely separate deity. And the name that Muhammad always referred to his god was Rahman. And then he actually changed. He actually stopped calling him Rahman and started calling him Allah later on. And this is probably why the Meccans rejected Muhammad, because the God he was talking about wasn't Allah, and their main God, the God of their pantheon, the supreme God, was Allah, but Rahman wasn't their God. Rahman was the God of Musaylima, a rival prophet who was living in Najd. And actually, if we look at the Encyclopedia of Islam #1, the first edition, it talks about how Musaylima was probably actually worshipping Rahman before Muhammad, because Muslims like to paint all the rival prophets from around Muhammad's time as being copiers of Muhammad, but in actual fact, it's more likely that Rahman had established Musaylima had established his belief in Rahman and his religion prior to Muhammad, and Muhammad actually copied Rahman from Musaylima. The reason for this is that Muhammad only talked about his God being Rahman in the early Meccan period, so he wasn't famous then, he wasn't notable, he wasn't powerful, and it makes no sense that someone would copy Muhammad when he had no power and he was just insignificant. Muhammad only became significant when he moved to Medina and when he was talking about Allah, and Rahman had just become an aspect of Allah. So it's actually much more likely that Muhammad was copied from Musaylama, especially considering that Musaylama had a massive army at his disposal, demonstrating a huge support base, demonstrating that he wasn't simply just pretending from Muhammad. He actually had a real big support base and a lot of followers. The point is that there's a pre-Islamic Arabian mythology that Muhammad is drawing upon, and initially it was Rahman, then Rahman just became a name for Allah, and he was following Allah. Another pre-Islamic Arabian tradition that Muhammad drew upon was that of jinn. It's quite an obvious one, but you might not think of it. Jinn are a superstition from pre-Islamic Arabia, as well as spells. And if you go to your Quran, I want everyone in the audience right now, get a Quran. Get a Quran and open it up to the very back of the Quran. Here's my crappy Quran. And I'm going to open it up now to the very end, right? And the last 2 chapters of the Quran. This is actually kind of fun, okay? This is an interactive program, ladies and gentlemen. Open your Quran to the very last page and have a read of what we have there, the last 2 chapters. We have, in the name of God, blah, blah, whatever. Say, I seek refuge with the Lord of the break of dawn, from the evil he created, from the evil of the approaching night, from the evil of women who blow knots, from the evil of the envier who envies. And then the next chapter, the very last chapter says, say I seek refuge with the Lord of mankind, King of mankind, God of mankind, from the evil of the one who whispers and recoils, who whispers in the hearts of mankind, of jinn and mankind. What the hell is that? That is a spell. That is an ancient Arabian invocation against magic, against witches, against evil jinn, against the enviers who envy, against the evil eye. So these last 2 chapters of the Quran reflect ancient Arabian superstitions.
I actually still remember that by heart. I just realized that now.
Is it used in that sense?
Yeah,
yes,
it is.
yes.
It is.
To this day.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few examples of that. There's a few different ones that you can use. There is the chair, the eye of the chair, in Surat Yasin, I think. There's a few examples. I don't remember all of them, but yeah, they still are used in that way. There are verses that you say over people who you think are possessed by jinns. There are all sorts of different sayings that come directly from the Quran. Some of them are some of those little surahs. That one specifically is one of them.
Well, someone in the chat remarked that the Surah An-Nas was a bizarre way to end the final message to mankind. Of course, it wasn't necessarily the last.
It's not chronological, yeah. That's probably one of the first ones.
Still, God must have known that it would eventually be organized this way and that it would end up last. But yeah, I mean, it is, when you're reading the Quran for the first time and you lack that context, it seems like this really terrible beatnik poetry where he rhymes the word mankind with itself about 7 times, and you're like, well, who rhymes a word with the same word? Especially when and he also says that in Arabic it's not even the shortest. There's a few of the shorter. There's some that are actually a little bit shorter in the original Arabic, at least.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean,
it's like we used to say in their tweets. This is Muhammad's Twitter.
Yeah. I've said that.
Like, I've got a problem with Abu Lahab.
Somebody mentioned in the chat that it's very easy to remember, though, and that's true. I think that was actually a part of what it is. These verses are very easy to remember.
Yeah.
Right, so like, F you, Abu Lahab. Yeah. You're going to hell. And that's just like an angry tweet. No.
Well, no, your wife is going to hell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your wife carrier of sticks. You don't forget about the sticks. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is very easy to remember because I haven't tried to remember the Quran since I was like 13, I think, and I still remember a lot of these surahs just automatically. I mean, as soon as I hear the first verse, I can finish the rest of it, and so that's why it rhymes a lot of the same word over and over again because it is very easy to remember.
Yeah, I just thought, I mean, because you hear so much, oh, well, you know, if you read it in the original Arabic, it's so beautiful. So I you know, plodded slowly through the Quran in its original Arabic, and I thought, this guy rhymes the same word with itself so many times. I mean, it's like the more you read it, it's like, this guy was terrible. I mean, or whoever it was who wrote this stuff, just did not have, was not gifted in the art of verse.
It's remarkable how there's such a juxtaposition between the claim of Ijaz al-Quran, the claim of the inimitable Quran, and the actual, like, the text itself, which is so terrible.
Yeah.
It is
I've written this book with no plot, no storyline, nothing that you can follow in any way. You can't follow, can't follow this thing no matter what way you put it. You can't. I mean, there is no plot.
Different styles.
It's ridiculous.
Different. I'm going to make it seem as though it's almost got different authors at different points. You know, like at one point it's going to be incoherent stage, you know, kahin poetry, prose. Other parts it's going to be like prosaic, lay out laws. You know, I mean, like my favorite part, literally my favorite part is well, sorry, it's actually my least favorite, but I'm, you know, it's like favorite in like, oh, it's so terrible, it's awesome. Let's see if I can find this. Sorry, I prepared for the sources of the Quran, not the stylistic incoherence of the Quran. Just give me a second to hunt this down. This is so bad. Okay, yes, it's Surah 55. Surah 55. And the first part of Surah 55, I think, is you know, innocuous enough. And then it's extraordinary. Yes, oh my goodness. So basically, pretty much almost every single, like every second verse is, so which of your Lord's blessings will the two of you deny? And like, all the Quran does is it rhymes deny with deny. It's all, it just goes through and just says, you know, the sky raised and its balance, and he raised and he established balance so that you do not infringe the balance, but measure it in fairness. And short, well, he just rhymed balance 3 times. Awesome, Mohamed. And then he just goes, so which of your Lord's blessings will you deny? Something, created jinn. So which of your Lord's blessings will you deny? Something meat. So which of your Lord's... And he does it again and again and again for the rest of the freaking chapter. He just keeps on, so which of your Lord's... Oh, like, it's absolutely terrible.
Well,
it's such...
Yeah, the thing is...
No! Bored to Bits just said rhymes must be tough in the desert. No, the ancient Arab poets were really good. Like they used to be able to produce excellent poetry and prose, and they were famed for their ability to freestyle, you know, just off the top of their, you know, heads, like randomly, and to be able to do excellent poetry.
Yeah, and the thing is, Arabic really lends itself. I mean, I saw that I was on the site where. As a matter of fact, Wiktionary, if you put a word into Wiktionary, there's an option where it'll give you all the words that rhyme with it. If you went on to the Arabic version of Wiktionary, I'm pretty sure that the list of any word you could think of would just fill the whole screen, because Arabic ends many of its words on open vowels. So it's almost like writing a song in Spanish or Italian, where so many of the words end in final vowels that are open syllables that it's very easy to rhyme. So whereas, you know, if you're writing a song, I mean, I think people don't realize how restrictive English is. If you listen to some pop music, you'll hear heart rhymed with apart a zillion times because it has these finals. But if you have words where a third of all the words in the language end with the same open syllable, you have so much flexibility in what you want to say versus what you can fit in the prose in Arabic versus a more guttural Germanic language like English or. So yeah, I mean you can see why the ancient Arabic had a reputation for being a language of poets, because like I said, there were so many different things you could express and still maintain the rhyme and still maintain the meter.
Yeah.
So like I said, Mohamed had a
There's no excuse, basically.
Yeah, he had no excuse. He was just bad. He just couldn't think of a word to rhyme with. But someone did point out that this is in Urdu poetry. That's actually an accepted convention, and there's nothing wrong with it in their mindset. So maybe you'd have to compare to other contemporary texts. Maybe it wasn't that big of a deal, and we're just looking at it from a perspective where we frown on that. But like I said, it certainly wasn't necessary. He could have chosen any number of rhyming words.
You're right. In that, it could simply be that in Arabic, it makes perfect sense, and it's beautiful to just repeat the same line 20 times.
No, that's crap. And plenty of people have said as such.
I'm sure it's an excuse that will be leveled against me, and since
it is, but it's crap. I mean, just because you can say something, it doesn't mean that it's good or convincing. You can say that if you want, but it's still crap.
The things that I like though is like, for example, that I can't remember which one it is on the top of my head, but I tweeted it recently. The verse, actually, I will be able to find it. The verse where it's like, it's definitely wrong, because it's either Muhammad should have been more concise, right, and he should have not mentioned all these different types of people.
Is this the one where it's like your cousins and your mothers? Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, or if he really was trying to be detailed, then he forgot to mention cousins. So either way, the verse is wrong. Either it should be more concise or more verbose. But instead, he's managed to make it too verbose whilst not including enough detail. It's perfect. Hold on. All right, fine. I'll find you the bloody verse. And whilst I do that, everyone who's watching, have you mentioned Abdul Aziz?
Yes, we have. First thing we just discussed. If you don't mind me going back to that, that's the thing is, I listen to some apologists, Muslim apologists who operate in the West, and the way they complain. I mean, the discrimination and xenophobia are always wrong, but sometimes the way they bellyache, and I think, how many times have you been jailed? How many times have you been jailed for teaching a minority religious position? And many of these people, even some of the more liberal ones, they're the ones who decry secularism, which is the only system that prevents a bunch of loony right-wing Christians from cannibalizing religious minorities in the first place.
Yeah, I'm starting to have very little sympathy for anybody who cries Islamophobia, because honestly, why aren't we hearing about atheism phobia?
Yeah.
Right? Because certainly that's a much bigger problem than Islamophobia ever was and ever will be.
Yeah.
We don't lock up people anywhere in the world, in the West, in the Western world, for being a Muslim or for saying anything against Christianity. As a matter of fact, they get pretty much a free reign to do whatever the fuck they want. They get to have their own mosque. They get to go out on the streets and preach to people. They get to be an annoyance to everybody else, and they have the right to do it. And for the most part, nobody really cares, aside from maybe some hateful things that are said here or there, right? But that's certainly nothing like what atheists go through in their country, and what secularists or Christians even go through in their countries.
Yeah,
and I think it's absurd. Yeah, and I think it's absurd that they can say that they have the gall to say the word Islamophobia when this is happening to people in their midst.
It's symptomatic of I think a society of higher caliber. That in the West we have a culture of self-criticism and self-appraisal, where there are people who will keep social conservatives in check and say, don't be bigoted, don't be racist, and it's a really strong stream. I think that's a good thing. I think it shows, because what other culture has this tradition of such deep self-criticism and self-appraisal and like even like the feminist movement, for example, the culture to raise women's rights and to criticize the crappy gender roles that had been established in our society. What other culture can you point to that ever had the feminist movement that hasn't just copied it from the West? Like none. That's the answer. There has never been a massive proper feminist movie. Pointing to a random Muslim ruler from the Middle Ages who will happen to be a woman isn't feminism. That's just someone clawing the greasy pole of power. The actual paradigm shift in a culture, societal movement. This is what we're talking about here, and I think that's a good thing. I just think it's a pity that other cultures don't have this same.
No, I agree that it's a good thing. I'm not saying that it's not a good thing.
Yeah. It's ironic.
I have no sympathy for Muslims who cry Islamophobia, because you know what? Yeah, maybe some people hate Muslims, but I'll tell you who stands up to those people. It's mostly non-Muslims, okay? For the most part, the people denouncing these assholes, for the most part, are non-Muslims. And you cannot say the same thing about what's going on to atheists anywhere in the Arab world.
Yeah.
No Muslim ever comes out and says things like, atheists shouldn't be jailed. And if there is, they're shouted down by most of the other Muslims, who people will call moderates. And, I've got my own problems with that term. But
we disagree about the term we should use, but I agree what you mean.
Yeah, so, I just, like I said, I'm starting to lose all sympathy for any Muslim who cries Islamophobia. Because you know what? At least you've got somebody who'll defend you in the West, all right? And I don't see you doing anything to protect or defend minorities in your backyard. And so bullshit with you and your Islamophobia. Nobody cares, all right?
Yeah.
You're killing other people in your own countries, and these are the people that I'm going to worry about, not you crying about somebody called you something something on a subway somewhere, okay? And you're all crying about it.
Right.
I mean, it's really alarming to me. Sorry, Atheismo. One second. It's really alarming to me that it isn't even at the same level. Like, people are being mean in the West, and there are some political forces that are working to demonize Muslims and even get them thrown out of the country and whatever. But they've got no success. They're just kind of plotting this, and on the converse, people are being jailed and killed. That's the two we've got. People plotting and being mean,
lynch mobs,
right?
They're
and
lynch
unsuccessfully
mobs.
plotting and being mean, versus in the West against Muslims, versus people are dying and being jailed. It's amazing.
I have to respond to a knee-jerk point. Someone in the chat said, so unless Muslims in other parts of the world do something about their bigotry, I shouldn't do anything about what's going on in my backyard?
No.
That's an asinine question. That's not what anyone is saying.
Nobody said that. We've said quite clearly that, hey, when this happens, the first people to shut these assholes down, I do. I personally will shut down somebody like Pat Condell or somebody who's a bigot. Who's clearly a bigot. But I'll tell you what, okay? You gotta stop crying Islamophobia, alright? Every time something like this happens, if you're not gonna then turn around and cry bloody murder when somebody gets jailed or killed over atheism or blasphemy, alright?
Yeah.
You shut the hell up if that's gonna be your stance, alright? Because, you know what? I'm one of the first people who will shout down a bigot, okay? But I don't want to hear you crying about it unless you're willing to just as well cry bloody murder about what's happening in the other under your name, okay? Because these people are using other Muslims to say, look, we're the majority and this is what we're going to do. And so I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, you wouldn't anything that takes place in a purely discriminatory context. No, there's no innocent form of it. And nobody is arguing that. Nobody is arguing that we should sit back and let a minority here just be harassed, even if it's the mildest form of harassment. We still acknowledge it's wrong. We still condemn it actively. Okay, we're just pointing out the incredible double standard. And also, I'd like to point out that I temper my expectations by saying, okay, if you're in Indonesia and there was a guy who got beaten up by a mob and thrown in prison for some skeptical tweets, right? I respect you if you didn't jump into the middle of that mob to try to save that guy. I mean, that wouldn't be a reasonable expectation of me. I'm talking about people, Muslim apologists in the West who have never for a single day engaged in any activism, even though they're, relatively safe and free to say what they please operating in the West. You know what I mean? I mean, when has Reza Aslan, despite all his crying of Islamophobia, when has he ever engaged in any activism to say, okay, well, free someone like who's in a situation like the guy jailed in Kuwait, or free the guy beaten up in Indonesia? Now, if he has, and somebody, then I'll issue a correction. But you understand the term. I mean, generally speaking, these guys never give any indication that they give a fuck about any of these abuses of religious minorities in their own. They don't want to talk about it. And if you bring it up, they'll say, well, this is another example of your dehumanization of us. I remember Kling got in that exchange with a guest, and he said, well, here's some things. He's like, well, that's dehumanizing us by pointing out how we dehumanize other people. I'm like,
This is precisely the point that I'm making, okay? I'm not expecting every Muslim to go around and say, condemn everything all the time. What I'm saying is, if you're going to cry Islamophobia because somebody said something mean, all right, then I expect you to then turn around and decry what's going on in Muslim majority countries, okay? Because if you're going to do that, you cannot be that selective. Especially when you're talking about Islam and the persecution of Muslims, and you're then turning a blind eye to what Muslims are doing to other people.
Yeah, but
I think what I would say is it's not necessary to have to care about every single issue in the world, but I think you shouldn't it's bad to ignore them all the same, especially when you're defending a group, a demographic that in other parts of the world even in Muslims in the West. I mean, Muslim attitudes towards homosexuals and apostates are still pretty bad from what I've seen. I mean, I'm going to say that
they can do whatever they want,
I've only met two
I'm not
Muslims.
going to be. They cannot expect any sympathy from me when they do it.
I'd like to to give you an example. I think I've only ever met two Muslims who aren't homophobic. Every other Muslim I've ever talked to has been homophobic, towards gay people when I've brought up the subject. Like, it's actually kind of shocking. Like, here in Australia. But I want to take this opportunity to make a point here. Like, for example, what the phenomenon that I'm really angry at here, or that really irritates me that we're talking about here, is of a group only having concerns for the in-group. And it's ironic, right? Because this is something that always makes me really annoyed, and I've almost viewed the Ummah, the Muslim community, the concept to almost be like a racist concept, because it excludes all others, and Muslims ignore the plight of all non-Muslims and only ever focus on, well, it's almost always Palestine, but if it isn't Palestine, it's Muslims in Burma, or Muslims here, or Muslims there.
I think the point is being missed here, okay? I'm not saying anything from them. I'm saying that they should not expect my sympathy for their crying Islamophobia, because I don't care about their Islamophobia, the Islamophobia that they experience when, on the other part, atheists are being killed and jailed in other places. So I have no sympathy for your Islamophobia.
I do care about Islamophobia. I do have some sympathy. I mean, if it's like not all Muslims are like that. There are some nice Muslims, and they do experience unwarranted bigotry. But the thing is, right, like in a video comment section, it was quite ironic. I think it was a Christian was saying, when I made the video about Abdul Aziz, that a Christian was saying, oh, Klingschor doesn't care about Christians, he's ignoring the plight of Christians, he only cares about atheists, which is silly, because, I mean, like, I've done plenty to help Christians. I mean, when I went and worked as a volunteer in Africa, I was working and helping Christian communities, and they were very overtly Christian. So it's not true that I don't help Christians. But it's I hate people who do like what this user was describing, even though he was wrong. Like, I agree with him. I hate people who are like that. Like Christians who never ever, like, oh, you know, some Christian group in Africa is being oppressed by Muslims, ignoring the fact that Christians are murdering homosexuals and little kids who they call to be witches, or Muslims, oh, Islamophobia, ignoring the horrible atrocities that Muslims are committing towards atheists and freethinkers across the entire Muslim world, from Saudi Arabia to Pakistan to Indonesia.
And
you know, like,
before we move on,
it's kind of racism, and it's like, you know, you can. I don't have to. Like, I care about everyone. You know, it's not. Why do people always just blink at themselves? And it's like, what about the atheists? You know, in the Middle East. You know, or what about, you know, the Christians? What about, you know, I don't like this kind of limited view of, oh, I'm only going to help people of this select little group, you know, that I'm in because that's my religion and they're my co-religion. I think that's terrible. Like, I can't stand.
Before we go to our caller, let me just say that because we're not sympathetic to the whining, I think it is incredibly obtuse if anyone interprets that to mean that we are advocating sinking to the level of the people we're criticizing. You'd have to be incredibly dense to interpret what Kling or Ollie is saying, to say, okay, well, we should just sit back and let religious minorities be harassed if you know, if they have a counterpart, because maybe they came here to get away from that kind of thing. Maybe it's a vote of conscience that they came from. So we're not saying that at all. And if that's what you take
I think that anybody takes it that way is reading things that they want, that they've got in their own brain on it. Because I think everybody here has been clear about who decries Islamophobia or bigotry towards Muslims when it does happen, okay, and who doesn't. All right, and I think that we're all clear about that. I know for sure that you and Kling, for instance, do shout down bigots or you know, call them out on their bigotry when it happens. But I am not sympathetic to the whining of Muslims. That's what I'm not sympathetic to, is their whining and complaining. Because you know what? Look, they always get help, all right? And it's mostly from people like us, okay? And they don't give a shit about anybody else. And that's the problem I have.
Okay, Jay, welcome to the show. Are you still here? Jay? Oh, well, anyway, if you'd like to join the show, just remember, send a Skype contact request to the Gin and Tonic Show, or if you've already sent one, just send a message to me on the contact list, and we'll bring you in when we're ready to have callers. Jay's on, but it doesn't seem...
Sorry, I was mute.
Oh, there you go. Okay, well, I'll have to remove you if we can't...
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I was mute.
No problem. So what do you have for us today?
I am... Hi, everyone. I am really fed up about this word Islamophobia. Come on, guys. If I said stone is wrong in Sharia law, if I said the honor of the Prophet, he died from long time ago in the 7th century, he is more important than freedom and other people's life in this life right now, that will be Islamophobia. So forgive me, I will say, if I said don't marry children under any circumstances, because it's rape children by Sharia law, and everyone say you have Islamophobia. No, I have very logic reason to be afraid from Islam. When you threaten me to kill me because I am just different in my thought from them, don't tell me I have Islamophobia.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still reeling from this person I was having the exchange with in the chat, because I don't know how you can make the same point again and again, and some people are just too thick. They say, oh yeah, well, if someone's getting attacked and raped and they don't denounce the North Korean government, should we just let it happen? No! How can anybody be that stupid to think that that is what we are saying?
Unbelievable. I mean, this is the kind of moral relativism
Yeah.
that really does scare me sometimes. Okay, because you cannot. I mean, it's one thing just because you're saying that I'm sick and tired of your whining when you're getting all the help that you need to combat the Islamophobia that does the bigotry that takes place. Okay, I'm with Jay on the Islamophobia term itself, but the bigotry against Muslim that takes place. Okay, they've got help on that. All right, people are helping them on that, and everybody understands. Hey, at least everybody that I associate with, that bigotry from the right is a problem, and it needs to be combated. Right.
Yeah.
That is not the same thing as saying that I'm sick and tired of you crying Islamophobia every single time something mean happens to you. Meanwhile, you don't care about anybody else.
Yeah.
Okay? We're not saying that, okay, we should then just leave you to die. What I'm saying is I'm sick and tired of your selfishness and your bullshit. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're arguing against...
You're calling out their hypocrisy.
Yeah, we're arguing against a form of selective outrage. We are not arguing against a rival system of selective outrage. I mean, if we were going to do that, we might as well all convert to Christianity. If we're going to just say, oh...
to Jay's point, by the way, about Islamophobia, the term technically means irrational fear of Islam. Okay? And it's not an irrational fear of a bad idea. I mean, if you've got a good reason to be afraid of something, like the idea of Sharia law or child marriage, like Jay has mentioned, or the subjugation of women, and you are a woman, let's say, living in Saudi Arabia, like some people may be, okay, it is not irrational to fear Islam, is it? I mean, that's a really rational fear. I mean, why wouldn't you be afraid of somebody who says we're going to cut your clitoris? I'd be afraid.
This is why I never say Islamophobia, because I agree that I think any ex-Muslim would be fine having a fear of Islam, given that Islamic tradition has, throughout history, ijma scholars and the hadiths, and as per the laws of several Muslim countries, dictates the death penalty. So I can see why an ex-Muslim would have Islamophobia, right? That makes sense. So what I say is anti-Muslim bigotry. That is always the term I use, because I think it's a better description of what the phenomenon is, rather than Islamophobia.
Yeah, I think that you've nailed it there, because it is bigotry against Muslims, or it's the same problem that you have with
bigotry against homosexuals.
I'm trying against homosexuals, exactly. Now, homophobia doesn't stand for the idea of gay sex. Homophobia stands for the actual gay person. Islamophobia is the fear of the idea of Islam. And that's not a phobia. That is a rational fear.
Well, I mean, it depends what, because it could be irrational if they believe conspiracy theories about Islam. But if their fears are simply, I don't know, Islamic tradition and the implementation of Islamic law, yeah, I mean, I would. If Islamic law was, like, putting aside stupid conspiracy theories, if it's like where this is actually happening, if Islamic law was seriously being implemented in my country, that would, to the extent that it was like becoming like, state law or something, I would be afraid. I would be screwed.
Yeah.
Well, I would be dead. So obviously I would be afraid of that. So I can appreciate people can be afraid of the concept or the idea or the system. Yeah, the hypothetical system. But
by the way, how did we get this far off topic? By the way,
what? Can we please return to the
yeah. Let's do that.
All right, I had more rants.
I'll give you a final comment, and then I won't respond. I'll simply move on.
I'll just say that what we were talking about originally, Ollie and myself, were Yeah, and someone made the comment, it is my fault for getting off topic, answering some random jackass from the chat in the middle of fucking... It is my fault, all my fault. So I'll end here. I saw this thing, I've been working on my French, and I saw this vid where there was a guy. He's living in France. He's like an Algerian immigrant or something, and his name is Mohamed. And the difference in callbacks when he was looking for work, when he put his name as Mohamed on a resume versus when he just made up some nickname and put it up there. You know, if he called himself, Mark or Francois. You know, and then it was a huge difference. So, I mean, obviously the discrimination is there, and we should take that very seriously. It's just that we're not sympathetic to the citation of that attitude. First of all, anyone who mistakes that sort of mentality, the person who says, well, I won't give this guy a job because his name's Mohammed, with a criticism of doctrine or society and so forth, anyone who thinks that we'll accept whining as a currency in debate, is barking up the wrong tree, first of all. I mean, and then, look, I mean, we should always work on, the problems in our own society, but in the meantime, it would be nice if there was some cleanup on the other side. But no one is arguing passivity locally, just throwing up our hands in frustration and saying, okay, well, we'll let our own bigots run free because there's bigots elsewhere. No one is arguing that. No one in their right mind would argue that, but that was what this person was.
I'm going to take issue with something you said there, okay?
Yeah.
Because I know, but I have to say this, okay? Because a Muslim who faces this kind of discrimination in the West, all they have to do is call up the ACLU or the government and let them know that this has happened, and they will get their rights handed to them back by law, and they will find help for free from people like us, secular people, who care about their plight, okay? This is why I don't have sympathy for their cry of Islamophobia, because when it actually affects them or hurts them directly, they have channels that they can go to and get help quite easily. It's not that difficult to do this, alright? There are plenty of people who will listen when this happens. And this is why I don't have sympathy for that, for the claim of Islamophobia, because they've got the tools that they can use to get their rights fair and square. All right, and so this is why I don't have sympathy for them, because they can get retribution for this. So it's absolutely absurd to then go and cry about it when you've already got a way to get your rights back. I mean, I don't know if that makes the problem that I have.
Anyway, the person I was sparring with, they kept again and again and again, they kept saying, "Oh, so you're advocating sinking down to their level?" No, wrong.
We've already written laws that you cannot do this. Yeah. We've already given them ways to get lawyers for free. We've already given them enough tools to fight on their own behalf with very little effort. All right, this is the problem. This is my issue with the whining. Okay, we've already given you the tools, and on top of that, we are the first ones to attack bigots when they spout hateful things that are not necessarily against the law. And so, what are you crying about?
And we've lost Jay again. Okay, Klingschor, we've officially buried this topic. Yeah, Jay, if you listen to this later, or if you can hear me now, it's just the connection problems are too bad. I'm sorry about that. If you have a question you'd like to ask and you want to put it in text, I'll read it out loud on the show. I mean, I do everyone's apparently now. I read every stupid comment in the chat.
And if anyone else wants to call in, just add the Gin and Tonic Show, the Gin and Tonic Show on Skype. Actually, there's an icon, isn't there? There's an icon you can click on, isn't there? Up on the banner. I don't know if that works, but it might. Anyway, and the topic is the sources of the Quran.
You wouldn't know it, though, if you've been watching the show up to this point.
Speaking of which, Jewish tradition, that also it was a very prominent source of the content of the Quran. And I'll keep it brief because I'll get through like a quick skim of all the sources, all the different traditions it drew upon, and then we can explore at our leisure particular aspects. So a really, really good way to demonstrate just how extensively the Quran drew upon Jewish tradition is to look at the names of the individuals mentioned in the Quran and the number of times they're mentioned. So this is a pop quiz for the audience. None of you guys who are knowledgeable on the panel say, give it away. All right, guys, without Googling, who is the main character of the Quran? Who is the main character of the Quran? Who appears the most in the Quran? Who is mentioned most? Whose story is the most fleshed out in the Quran?
Other than Allah, right?
Other than Allah, yeah.
The story about a little boy named Allah. And anyway, no, it was Moses.
Yes, Moses is the correct answer. Well done, you guys.
You know what?
I was going to say the kuffar, or the mushrikeen.
Yeah, actually, yeah. He's got us there, because they get mentioned a lot. If it was a person, yeah, the kuffar get mentioned a lot more, the unbelievers.
All right.
No, but remember, Allah is supposed to be the narrator of the Quran, so he's obviously, you know, who does the narrator talk about the most apart from himself, I suppose.
Well, Allah is Mark Twain, and Moses is like Huckleberry Finn.
Well, Moses is mentioned 136 times in the Quran as Musa. Abraham is mentioned 69 times as Ibrahim. The Pharaoh is Firaun. I can't pronounce that, sorry. Appears 74 times. Noah as Nuh appears, and you have to forgive my atrocious pronunciations of these. Actually, I'm not even going to give you the pronunciations. You know what? I'm just going to tell you the dudes. Noah appears 43 times. Adam appears 25 times. Joseph appears 27 times. Lot appears 27 times. Aaron appears 20 times. Isaac appears 17 times. Solomon 17 times. David 16 times. Jacob 16 times. Ishmael 12 times. Haman 6 times, Jonah 4 times, Job 4 times, Korah 4 times, because they got off Avatar, Legend of Korah. Anyway, Goliath 3 times, Elijah 3 times, Saul and Elisha.
I think I see a theme developing.
And who is this person? Eleazar or something, and Ezra appear only once.
So I mean, there's obviously.
And Muhammad appears 4 times. Muhammad is mentioned.
Obviously, it's a who's who of Old Testament figures and some New Testament, but you know, it's amazing that he didn't draw more from pagan sources. I mean, the pagans surely had a lot of their own stories. They had a lot of their own figures. I mean, it's amazing that he was so disdainful of locally produced traditions. But I think that Muhammad really idolized Moses. And if you look at Muhammad's life versus Moses' life, I think that, like a lot of prominent historical figures, that they'll model their lives on previous historical figures who inspired them. You know what I mean? And in this case, I think Muhammad was inspired by Moses.
Something.
I think that you could probably. I was just going to say that.
Let Ali go.
You go.
Before you go back.
You go.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that a lot of this may have to do with the way his hallucinations were interpreted into Scripture, because they were interpreted using the help of Jews and Christians. So it makes sense why he would. Well, I mean, that's who's in his midst.
Yeah.
I mean, the Quraysh actually, accused Muhammad many times of actually plagiarizing and getting his information from Jews and Christians.
Specifically, Khadija's cousin.
Oh, and not just. There was
according to their own law, yeah.
A Christian blacksmith, a Jewish slave, or something like that, and then he had Jewish followers in Yathrib. But what's interesting, this always makes me laugh, is that in the Bible, hopefully I'm correct about this, because it said so in the book that I read, and from what I remember, it seems true enough. The prophets are quite self-effacing. It's all about God, and we have to just do what God says, and all the things that God says usually are not to the unique advantage of the prophets. There's always just annoying rules and laws and just stupid arbitrary crap. And basically, it's all for God. Whereas with Muhammad, it's all about Muhammad, and what Muhammad does. Whenever Muhammad mentions the prophets of the Old Testament, even though he mentions them all the time, he mentions them as a rhetorical device to confirm his own message. So instead of talking genuinely about the stories of Abraham and the stories of Moses, Muhammad talks about these prophets as though their prophets are going through Muhammad's experiences in ancient times to prove Muhammad's experiences in modern times. It's like, oh, I'm being persecuted just like, you know, Moses and Abraham, blah blah blah. You know, he basically rewrites the story, or he twists the stories of Abraham and Moses and Jesus to make it seem as though simply Muhammad is the new Moses. Like Moses went through the same things as Muhammad in ancient times. You know, Jesus went through the same things as Muhammad in ancient times, and now here I am, Muhammad, going through the same things now. You know, like does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, and it actually sounds, I think, spot on. I mean,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say that sounds pretty spot on, because when he talks, he says kama, which is basically saying like happened to, you know, the mushrikeen do this and do that, kama hasala ma'a, and that means like happened with Moses or like happened with Abraham, and you're absolutely right. It's used as a rhetorical device when he's talking about what's happening with him at the moment. So
I mean,
see that.
I'll read you. I've been writing many scripts, and this is from my script for a textual analysis of the Quran. So you guys are getting a sneak peek here. But basically, I wouldn't be able to say it more eloquently than I've written it here. The main character within the narrative of the Quran is Moses, with whom Muhammad closely identified. Nearly all of the themes and motives within the Quran are taken from Judeo-Christian tradition, appropriated by the Quranic author in order to promulgate his message of strict monotheism. Judeo-Christian narratives are frequently distorted within the Quran from their original context and altered to reflect Muhammad's situation. And then I offer the following quote from Alfred Guillaume, who translated the Sirat Rasulullah, for those who've read that. And quote, "The Quran differs profoundly from the Old Testament in the treatment of its characters. The stories of the patriarch and the prophets in their original setting are straightforward narratives which, even if composite in origin, carry the reader forward from the birth to the death of the hero and present a consecutive or fairly consecutive series of events. Not so in the Quran. There, the characters are introduced to serve their turn as successful preachers in antiquity of the doctrines promulgated by Muhammad in the present." And then, end quote, and I continue. "The original narratives of the biblical characters from Judeo-Christian tradition were thus subsumed by Muhammad in the Quran for the sake of religious polemic. In the words of Guillaume, the generous breadth of vision and self-effacing heroism of the biblical prophets were lost or obscured in the self-centered pronouncements of the Arabian prophet." So there you have it, and that's the Jewish influences in the Quran. I mean, now the Jewish influences in the Quran are much more extensive than merely names. I mean, there are you know, rabbinical stories.
Yeah, I actually already kind of talked about some of this.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you I don't know if you know Robert Wright or if you've read any of his stuff.
No, I've never heard of him. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Well, basically, he talks about the two different narratives in the Jewish texts. I don't remember where the original one was, of Ismail and Isaiah, and they talk about, or is it?
Oh, do you mean
it's Isaac?
Ishmael and Isaac?
Yeah, and Isaac, and how there are two different versions of the story. The first is Abraham takes Hajar as a concubine, and basically he has sex with her or whatever, and then when Ismail is born, Sarah drives Hajar into the desert, and the proclamation after his birth is he will wander all the rest of his days like an ass, or something along those lines. And then later on, in the source P, the story is a little different, and he kind of attributes that to the Persian Empire and their wishes to have the Arabs and Jews make friends, so the Arabs didn't align with the Egyptians, and so the narrative is a little nicer, let's say, to Ismail, and Hajar then becomes Abraham's wife instead of just a concubine. The proclamation is then that he will make many out of Ismail, and he will make him a great nation instead of he will walk the rest of his days like an ass. And basically Muhammad takes advantage of this second narrative to connect the Arabs and himself to Abraham in an attempt to attract more Jews anyways. So I don't know, I kind of...
Oh, well, the thing is that this is from, even though it's kind of like a Jewish of origin, this actually relates to Arabian tradition. There was a prevalent belief in antiquity, even before Muhammad. There was the belief that the Arabs were descended from Abraham and from Ishmael. This was a prevalent belief amongst the Arabs at the time. So Muhammad drew upon Arabian tradition.
They were called the Ismailites. The Arabian
that's right.
tribe.
That's exactly right. And Hajarites. Actually, it's thought that the
although I think Hajarites is a derogatory term.
Muhajirun is thought by some to refer to, if I remember correctly, to refer not to immigrants but to the people of Hajar.
DPR, welcome to the program. Can you hear us?
It's interesting.
I can indeed. Hello.
Someone in the chat briefly said that they thought Jews were just a tribe of Arabs. There's definitely a common origin.
They're all Semites.
Yeah. So I mean, as much as Arabs and Jews don't like each other, they got a lot of the same family tree. I mean, the tradition says as much, but it probably didn't happen exactly like that. I mean, one group went north and west, and the other went south and east, and the rest is history.
No. The Arabs also Semites are from Yemen, right? Isn't that correct? Like, and then some of them went north and would have become Sumerians and Jews and Canaanites, and others stayed south and they were Arabs.
Sumerians weren't necessarily. Well,
I know that they're all Semites.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're all Semites. I don't know.
You're thinking of Akkadians or people like that.
Am I? I'm pretty sure the Sumerians were Semitic.
No, the Akkadians were Semitic, but the Sumerians...
Jews are not Arabs. They're certainly related to Arabs, but I don't think.
No. You know what? You are correct. Modern historians have asserted Wikipedia here. Modern historians have asserted that Sumer was first settled by a non-Semitic people. I bow to your expertise in ancient Sumerian ethnography, Atheismo.
Yeah. See, I don't know all this religious garbage, but I know the linguistics and the genes and the words often piggyback on each other.
Yeah, you're right. And the Akkadians were Semitic. That's absolutely you hit it on the nail. I'll never again will I cross you on matters of ancient Mesopotamia.
Like I said, if there's a linguistic thread, I'm gonna do it. Otherwise, anyway, DPR. Sorry, we've been ignoring you. Please. Start. What do you have for us today?
Oh, don't worry about ignoring me. I'd like to go back, if I may, there's 2 points. Firstly, going back, if I may, to what was being discussed, particularly by Ali, about Islamophobia. Firstly, there seems to me 2 interpretations of that word. And I think that Ali was absolutely correct when he used it in its proper definition, namely a phobia, a fear of Islam. But would you not accept that in common parlance, in general usage, the word is not being used in that way? It is being used as a way of describing those that have a dislike, hatred, or disrespect for Islam. And that is a distinction that ought to be made clear, is it?
Yeah, there's a difference between someone
It's like homophobia.
There's a difference between someone who...
Homophobia is...
No, because here's the problem that I have with that, is that anybody who criticizes Islam gets shouted down as an Islamophobic, okay? Yeah. And so while you're right that maybe some people are using it in the sense that you have an irrational fear of Muslims or you're a bigot towards Muslims, right? But then what happens is that Muslims will use the term against anybody who criticizes Islam, right? And so I think that it's useful to get rid of this term and call bigots who say hateful things towards Muslims that, and Islamophobia is a term that should never be used, since there is no such thing as an irrational fear of an idea that calls for the death of other people. And so this is the problem I have with that, because you got to separate the idea from the people, and it gets mixed up when you use that term, at least in my experience. I get shouted down my father tried to tell me that I practice discrimination because I criticize Islam and that I'm Islamophobic. Okay, when I never ever say any bigoted things towards Muslims, I voraciously go after the idea of Islam, but that's not irrational. They want to kill me, and so the problem is that yes, you're right. A lot of people who mean bigotry towards Muslims use that term, right? And then and you can talk about that, but I think that the term itself needs to be gotten rid of because it's used as a weapon, or is turned and used as a blunting tool against people who just criticize Islam and stay away from bigotry.
Yeah, well, yeah. The thing is that it's so often used as a currency in strictly debates on matters of doctrine or other things. You know, it's like if I believe that the Earth is flat, and people who believe what I believe are spat on and jailed and discriminated against, and you know, our homes are burnt down and so forth. If someone confronts me and says, "Look, you're an asshole. The Earth isn't flat. It's been round, and we've known for a long time." No matter how much persecution I, in actuality, face for that belief, doesn't make the belief correct, and it doesn't mean that the criticism against it is invalid. You know?
I had a second point which sort of like follows on from it, and I appreciate your views because you all are from legal jurisdictions which are quite different to mine, or different. In this country, we have anti-discrimination laws which relate to things such as age, disability, gender, marriage, pregnancy, race, and a few more. And one of them is religion. And what we find is that there are circumstances in which religious beliefs obviously interfere with or contradict the laws in relation to discrimination, such as a religious belief that someone may hold about homosexuality or women's rights and so on and so forth. Now, in this jurisdiction, as I say, which basically covers Europe as well, because it's mainly come out of European law, the courts have seemed to give preference when there is a conflict between religious beliefs which discriminate against protected societies such as those that I've just listed. They always give preference to the religious. I just wonder what the situation is in the countries that you're in, and whether you think that religion is given too much of what Dawkins refers to, too much tolerance, and it should be treated in the same way as other forms of discrimination.
I'll speak for myself. I live in the United States, and I love this country, okay? Immensely. It's not the perfect country, okay? But for all its faults, in America, I can say whatever the hell I want about Islam, Christianity, or any other idea, and be allowed to say it. I can say anything about anybody that I want to say, and I don't run afoul of the law, and I like that, okay? Because, yes, you get some people like the Westboro Baptist Church, but then you get tons of people who call their religions wacky, who call them a bunch of bigots, who call them all sorts of things, and we can do that, and we're winning. Okay, you win this argument every time, and so I think that as long as you're not actually discriminating, and by discriminating I mean you take actions that harm these people based on these criteria, okay, then you're fine. And I love that about this country, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
I'm going to bring in Godless Libertarian, who has some questions about something that actually he was going to talk about Zulkarnain, which Klingschor briefly brought up, but then we got sidetracked. Probably by some shenanigans that I brought up, or me shouting and yelling at someone in the chat. Gio, are you with us? Oh, wow. That's great.
Did I answer your question, DPR, or?
Can you hear me?
We'll get back to DPR in a minute.
Go ahead.
God, let's go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, great. Yeah, just the question is about what does Aleph Lam Mim mean? If we're talking about origins of the Quran, and what are the origins of that, and the Zulkarnain character?
I'll take the first one, and then the Klingschor probably has something to take. But the letters that appear at the beginning, they're just letters, like Aleph, Lam, Mim. Those are just letters in the Arabic alphabet, or it's not really an alphabet. It's I think an abjad. But yeah,
Nobody knows.
Yeah, that nobody really knows. They could be some kind of secret code. It could be that at some point some scribe made notes using these letters for his own notation purposes, and then they were never removed. Nobody really knows how they got in there or what they are. We have no way of knowing if they're traditionally part of the chants, although that people who now memorize the Quran or have the songs where they sing, they will include those. But nobody knows what they mean. There's been guesses and nothing concrete. It's the one area where even the tafsir are of little or no use. Nobody
Let me just tell you what Muslims think about them.
Okay.
Muslims in general think that the Quran contains secrets that will later be found to be true, and they think that at some point we will understand what this means when some revelation, when we discover something, and so it's basically a kind of mysticism in a way. Because
like one day we will discover that jinn are real.
We will discover that Aleph Lam Mim solves the answer to the Big Bang or something, right? I mean, at least that's what they'll tell you.
Is there
justification of their book, and it's something that I've criticised not only in relation to the Bible but also the Quran as well. If it was really true, then why was their God so bad at communicating, or hid his message so well? In fact, every God has done it. Hid their message so well that no one can actually read the book and make a prediction from it. All they can do is sort of like look afterwards and say, "Oh yeah, that's what it meant all the time. Why were we so dumb that we didn't recognize it?" It's banal.
Well, because it's a human book. I mean, there's a very simple answer for that. There was no God, and Mohamed made all this stuff up. And it's just as good as Nostradamus' book. Or just as bad, I should say.
Yeah.
And was Zulkarnain Alexander the Great?
Yes, without a doubt. I used to, once upon a time, a couple of years ago, I used to, I'd often go and sit down and have coffee with one of my Muslim professors, and we'd argue about Islam and chat about the Quran and stuff. And this is one of the subjects we used to argue about. Back then, my knowledge of the Zulkarnain was incomplete, and I could still learn more. But given what I now know, I can say with absolute certainty, like all of my professors' objections to the Zulkarnain being Alexander the Great, like are made redundant now. And I'll now, with the benefit of this knowledge, I can lay out the facts and say with certainty, with as certain that Alexander the Great is Dhul al-Qarnayn as I am certain that gravity exists.
Well, so this guy's position was that he wasn't.
Yeah, because Alexander the Great was a polytheist, believing in pagan Greek gods, and Alexander and Dhul al-Qarnayn is a monotheist according to the Quran. So now, but all these objections are made redundant. First of all, for the audience, who must be...
Zulkarnain sees the sun setting in the west. How west did Alexander the Great go? He went east. I mean, so where do they get that?
All right, so I'll tell you exactly where they get it from. All right, so
this feels like a softball.
According to the... Huh?
Go ahead.
Okay, so essentially, for those who are listening in the audience, in the Quran, there appears this figure, Dhul al-Qarnayn, he's a mighty hero who traveled to the eastern and the western extremities of the earth, where the sun rose and fell respectively. And at the former location, where the sun rises, he encountered a people who, due to their proximity to the sun, endured great heat without respite during the daytime, and at the latter, at the place where the sun sets, he found a body of murky water. And so, after this adventure, Zulkarnain proceeded to travel elsewhere until he came across two great barriers, two great walls or barriers or bastions, in whose shadow he found a race of, bestial and subhuman people who begged him for help, because beyond the barriers lay the lands of Gog and Magog. Not a wall. These are mountains, and beyond them lay Gog and Magog, an evil apocalyptic race from whom the people sought protection. And so what Alexander the Great did was he joined up the mountains with a great bastion of iron and brass. And of Gog and Magog imprisoned, and according to the Quran, the wall will stand for all at the end of time, when Gog and Magog will break through and destroy the world. So this is one of the greatest proofs of Islam, praise Allah, because to this day, the wall of Gog and Magog still stands to keep them out until Judgment Day.
Where is this wall?
Anyway, it doesn't exist. I'm being facetious. There is no Great Wall, because this is the great thing. This is the great thing about the story. We can trace the evolution, the development, and the origins of the story from its beginnings in the time of Alexander the Great, all the way through its evolution and its development to the time of the Quran and beyond. The story continues to evolve. So we can see how it changes and how basically the Quran is repeating a false story, a fabricated story, a historical fantasy that was developed, and we can observe the development. So essentially, first of all, the name, Zulkarnain, which means the horned one, or the two-horned one. And the two-horned one was a name for Alexander the Great. But prior to Islam, throughout the Middle East, Alexander the Great was known as the two-horned one. In Egyptian tradition, Greek tradition, and Coptic and Ethiopian tradition. It was actually his name. So, right off the bat, the name of the person in the Quran is a name that Alexander the Great was widely known by. So they've got the same name. And the reason for this, the reason why he's called the two-horned one, is that in Christian tradition, Greek tradition, let's say, but it became Christian tradition. Alexander the Great is said to have, not Christian tradition, obviously, because it's a pagan god. Alexander the Great is said to have been the son of Zeus, via Zeus's incarnation as Ammon. So basically, he is the son of
Can I interject?
Either he's the son of Ammon or he's the avatar of Ammon. I can't remember. But essentially, he's associated with Ammon, and so because of this, Alexander the Great was depicted with ram's horns because of his association with Ammon. And so this is why Alexander the Great depicted himself on his coins with ram's horns. And as the story changed, it became that Alexander the Great in Middle Eastern tradition was actually said to have had physical horns, ram's horns in his head. What was the interjection you wanted, Atheist?
Okay, so wait, no, I have a question, Klingschor. Of the tafsir that you're aware of, how many of them come down, how many of them really address this issue? And which side of the issue do they come down? Are there tafsir
the ijma, the consensus is, Muslims agree that Alexander the Great is Zulkarnain.
Okay.
So, Muslim, like Abdullah al-Qurtubi, I can't say his name properly. Very famous tafsir, Mufassir, very famous. Ibn Kathir, yeah, there you go. Ibn Kathir, At-Tabari, As-Suyuti, they all agreed.
Okay.
They're all posited.
Now, for anyone who watches this, who finds this aspect obscure, the reason why, for example, Klingschor and his professor would wrangle over this, and the reason why it's a hotbed of contention, is because it's not just that this character depicted in the Quran is supposed to be based on Alexander the Great. The problem is that we have historical records of Alexander the Great, and then we also have the surviving Persian dramatical account. And the problem is that the version in the Quran is closer to the fictional account than the real one. That's why it's bone.
It's called it's actually the Alexander romance. That's what this is called.
I'm sorry. I honestly thought you said the Alexander bromance. Just I don't know if you actually did. I'll have to listen to it again. But that sounds.
I definitely said romance.
The Alexander bromance.
It's
coming to a theater near you from the director of
now on.
Brokeback Mountain, the Alexander bromance. Actually, they made that movie. What's it? The guy who made the Kennedy assassination movie. He made that. He made a movie Alexander, and it was filled with all these bisexual themes and so forth.
Yeah, I saw that.
I saw that. Awful. Not because of that, but I just thought it was terrible. But
Anyway,
he should have called the movie that. He should have called it the Alexander bromance.
The Alexander bromance. Yes, he probably.
So my next question.
Wait. I just want to know because there's more. It gets more exciting. Well, to me anyway. Because not only it's not merely like you think, oh, the name. It's not just the name is the same. It's the entire story in the Quran. Every single aspect of the story. Him traveling east and west. The wall of Gog and Magog is from a previous tradition, and we learn exactly why. So essentially, let me just consult my notes here surreptitiously. So the Quran says Alexander traveled to the western and eastern extremities of the earth. Now the story actually begins with an ancient legend about Alexander the Great, and according to Greek and Latin traditions from the 1st century onward, so quite early on, according to these traditions, Alexander the Great built gates, big gates in the Caucasus Mountains to keep out invaders. This was a tradition. Now, it was wrong. The tradition has little, from what I remember, it has little historical basis. But this is the root. This is where the story of Zulkarnain, as it appears in the Quran, begins. It begins with a Greek and Latin story from the 1st century CE, talking about Alexander the Great building gates in the Caucasus to keep invaders out. Now, and Pliny the Elder notes this story. And Pliny notes the giant iron gates and a fortress in the Caucasus Mountains, which were, and I quote Pliny here, erected for the purpose of barring the passage of the innumerable tribes. So barbarian tribes from north of the Caucasus. But as the years went on and the story changed from one culture to another and spread through the Middle East, it began to change. And so everyone knows Flavius Josephus. Anyone who's familiar with the Christian debate will know Josephus and his role as providing the earliest source for Jesus, apart from the fact that it was a plagiarism.
Yeah.
Well, Josephus says the following, and I quote, "The link between the apocalyptic peoples of Gog and Magog on the one hand and Alexander and the wall he is said to have built on the other apparently took its origin in..." Oh, sorry, this is not quoting Josephus. This is quoting someone talking about Josephus. Apparently took its origin in Jewish Hellenic circles in Alexandria at the beginning of the Christian era. It was Flavius Josephus who was the first to witness the trend. In his Jewish war, so Jewish war is the source, I believe, that the Christians used to try and prove Jesus. Josephus links the biblical Gog and Magog with the popular Hellenistic Alexander tradition. He says that Alexander closed a mountain pass by erecting gates south of the Caspian Sea. So now we begin to see these elements, different elements, because of course Gog and Magog are from the Bible, these apocalyptic peoples. And now already around 100 CE or AD, we can see these components are beginning to come together. And so it was that by the 1st century CE, Alexander the Great, widely as the true horned one, is attributed to having constructed a giant bastion of iron in the Caucasus Mountains of Central Asia to keep at bay, and also is associated with Gog and Magog. The association begins. Now, the Hun invasions of the 4th century CE, the Huns invaded and devastated Syria and northern Mesopotamia. And this was reminiscent of the biblical menace of Gog and Magog. And so this helped to further develop the tradition surrounding Alexander the Great. And in Alexander the Great, at this time, in the 4th century, he's become a superhuman protector of civilization. So now he's a superhuman hero. With God's help, Alexander the Great builds the giant barrier to contain Gog and Magog. And so essentially the story now is that Gog and Magog are trapped and will not emerge again until the end of time to ravage all humanity. Is the story beginning to sound familiar? Because this is exactly what the Quran says. The Quran says that Zulkarnain imprisoned Gog and Magog behind the Iron Bastion, and that they wouldn't be able to break free until the end of time. So, or in the 4th century, this is when this part of the story develops. And so now, by this time, Alexander the Great is a superhuman dude who... and by now, the legends also are talking about Alexander the Great, who traveling to the ends of the earth. So we have this story of Alexander the Great making a giant barrier in Central Asia to keep out Gog and Magog until the end of time. And we have stories of Alexander the Great traveling to the ends of the earth. And really, the culmination of all these is the Alexander the Romance, which was penned by a dude named Pseudo-Celestines, and essentially it's translated into, like, it's in Latin, it's in Syriac, it's in Greek. It's very widely available throughout the Middle East, and especially the version that Muhammad borrowed from is the Syriac version, most likely, which was completed and composed during Muhammad's lifetime. So it was actually composed to celebrate a Byzantine victory over the Sasanian Persian Empire. So it would have been well known and widely circulated. And it is from this, I mean, some Muslims might try and claim, the revelations came before the story this story was officiated, the Syriac version, to celebrate the victory. To which I would respond, Muslim tradition is wrong about the chronology of the verse, because it's absolutely certain that this Syriac edition is where Muhammad got the story of Zulkarnain. But even if he didn't, even if Muslims were right about the chronology, the story predates this, and all the elements were there in the approximate form. So either way, Muhammad copied the story from the previous stories. So basically, and I'll tie it up here and let others speak, because I've spoken for so long, I apologize. By the time of Muhammad's life, this was the story. Basically, Alexander the Great, a superhuman, and in these Christian sources, Alexander the Great is now a monotheist, by the way. That's crucial. Alexander the Great is known as the Two-Horned One, is a monotheistic hero of God, curling out of his head, who travels to the ends of the earth. He travels to the place where the sun rises. He travels to the place of the sun of fetid water, and then in Central Asia he builds a giant barrier to keep out the apocalyptic nations of Gog and Magog until the end of the time when Gog and Magog are break free. And this is the story that appears in the Quran.
Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Godless. We're going to go to our next caller. Thank you for joining us.
Yep, thank you.
Take care. Our next caller is someone we I'm sorry, what?
I stunned him with my long story.
Yeah. Stop spamming. Thank you for joining us.
Hey guys. Very quick question. I'll take the answer, your opinions or whatever offline. Because I've been sent, I'm in several discussions at the moment regarding Mali and Islamophobia. So what I have been given is the situation description as follows. In Mali, there was a coup last year. They installed secular democracy. Everybody was going about their business, living peacefully, everybody doing their own thing, until the Jews decided they want the uranium in Mali. So they went to the French, gave them a lot of money. The French sent some troops into Mali to go and kill as many Muslims as possible so that they can go and attack the uranium, which they wanted to extract from the ground so that they can give it to the Israelis because they want to build the atomic bomb to attack Iran. Now, for some reason...
That sounds legit to me.
For some reason, the Muslims who were peacefully living in Mali suddenly found themselves with guns in their hands. Nobody knows where they got them from. Nobody knows where they got weapons, guns, or anything. But they are now able to defend themselves against the Israeli-backed French mercenaries that are attacking the peaceful Muslims in Mali to get to the uranium that they have in the ground there. And now I am doubting this somehow for some reason, and I am being accused of Islamophobia. What is your opinion on this?
Well, I mean, it's a open and shut case. The guy, I mean, I don't know what the French are thinking, honestly. I mean, the grief that the United States has come to from intervening in the Muslim world, and the French are like, hey, let's join in the fun. Let's send our troops to some extremely convoluted situation between
Wait, are they sending troops or are they just bombing?
They sent troops.
Like a force like the United States had in Iraq, or
they're not occupying the whole
they're
country.
Reoccupying the colony. What ho?
Yeah,
that sounds like BS to me. I think that France was basically begged to come and help stave off the. I mean, you talk about extremists.
Yeah.
African Muslim extremists are way out there. I mean, Africa in general is just in a really dark place in most cases.
But that's the point. You're being Islamophobe now.
Mali or Algeria?
Mali.
Well, I'm talking about Nigeria, Somalia.
France has a lot of troops. France already has a lot of troops in Mali.
No, but and France has got lots of troops in Africa. I think Côte d'Ivory, the Ivory Coast, I think. And pardon?
Côte d'Ivoire.
Oh, sorry, my excuse my barbarian tongue. Yeah, like I mean, it's weird, but I remember, I used to be interested. Now I'm not. And I did a lot of research on French colonial possessions, and apparently that the French have got quite an active military role in West Africa still.
But is that? I mean, is this role? Let's say not being asked for the French to play. Are the French basically going on their own behalf? Like, let's say we did in Iraq.
This is the point. It depends on whom you ask.
Well, I mean, from what I understand, they were
supporting the non-Al-Qaeda associated rebels in the north. They are based essentially in the south, but they are there, so far as I understand it, at the request of the current Mali government.
Yeah. You're
an Islamophobe as well.
Well, I mean, see, the thing is, if you got some conspiracy theorists saying that, I don't know why they would decry that the Malian government is compliant. But I mean, it's crazy. I saw this one thing by an Egyptian marine biologist who said that Israel was training sharks to attack Egyptians at the beach. I mean, what can you do?
Yes, there are in fact Israeli military sharks attacking fishermen's boats.
The Israeli military menagerie continues with vultures.
Yep, and the Egyptians, we are retaliating by training scorpions to cross the desert and sting Israelis back.
Yeah,
But going back to Stop's question, what I don't understand, because France is an incredibly independent country that gives no flying fuck on the whole for any other country or human rights issues or whatever, why it feels committed to intervening in Mali is something that I don't understand.
Yeah, like I said, I would have thought that they would have learned a lesson from the failures and setbacks that other countries I could name have experienced getting involved in these very
Well,
confused
to be fair, ECOWAS, the West African Nation Coalition, and a lot of the Malians needed a little bit of help until they got their act together and were able to confront them on their own. From what I understand, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a perfectly fine thing if the French are allies with West African countries and they're allies. Let's say, for instance, Japan is attacked by China tomorrow. I'd fully expect the United States to get involved on the behalf of Japan, and I would understand completely why they would.
I guess I'm so
They had a lot
accustomed.
of
I'm so
they had
accustomed to
consultants on
interfacing.
the
I'm so
ground.
accustomed to interfacing with continental Europeans who are spitting bile on the United States for its military posture.
Yeah, but I mean, we shouldn't turn around and use the same flawed.
Yeah. No, I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying
Europeans
that,
as a whole are a bunch of weak sauce jerks. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding. I take that.
well, no, I mean,
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, but France
Are you
has a lot. I
expecting
mean, a
a
friend of
rise
mine
out
is
of
a
the alley?
consultant, and he spends a lot of time in West Africa. So France still has economic ties to most of its ex-colonies. So they do send consultants, they do send excavation teams, they do send economic support teams, or whatever you want to call it, out to West Africa to help them and go and establish themselves, of course making a tidy profit on the way. But the thing is, it's primarily an economic thing. It's not a military thing. It's only now that it's become military. And this is the whole point. And you're quite right, Atheismo. I don't know why they didn't learn from the others, from what has happened over the last 10 years, or 15 years by now, that they don't shy away from getting involved militarily. I mean, that is stupid.
But you're assuming that this is a lesson that they should learn. I think that we
Yes.
need to learn a lesson
Well,
that we
hang
really
on a
shouldn't
second.
care.
Why-
Let me
why
finish, please.
should it-
finish.
Please do, but go on. Sorry.
Okay. No, I was just going to say that you're assuming that the French should learn a lesson that the Americans didn't. When I think that actually the way it should be is that the Americans should learn a lesson that they really shouldn't give a shit about calls of Islamophobia and all this stuff, and do whatever the hell it is they want to do, and not worry about that. Because guess what? Okay, when things go wrong in Syria and the United States doesn't intervene, guess who's giving them shit? The Europeans are, the Arabs are, the Syrians are, because we didn't intervene. You intervene somewhere else, and
You know
they
what?
give you shit for intervening. And
You know
so
what it is?
you
This
shouldn't
is-
really
this is-
care what they think. You should just do what you think is right. You should help your allies or the people that you think are your allies, and not really worry about what everybody else says, because you're right. Atheismo's right that the Europeans were, Iraq this and Iraq that, and now when it's their allies, they're willing to do it. And you
but
don't
my
you don't
thing
hear
is, I
crying
think
from
a
the
lot of
United
their-
States about that, do you?
a lot of their criticisms against us were perfectly understandable and legit. I mean, we're kicking ourselves for not listening to them. You know?
That was the point I was seeking to make. Unfortunately, not only America, but also other countries.
Okay.
Don't
So now that we've stayed
appear
out of
to be
Syria, do you
able
think that's
to
going to turn
learn
out in our favor?
lessons
Go ahead.
from history. That was my point. And America, I mean, come on. You didn't learn from Vietnam. You didn't learn from Korea. You didn't learn from, what other...
Korea we tied.
Well, you did tie, yeah, kind of. But that was, you were helped
Does that
out
help?
by the United Nations. But
You could argue we won. You could argue that I gotta stop saying
yes,
we.
you could argue,
the
but
United States won that.
what sort of victory is it when you've left Korea split in the way it is?
Well, there could have
I
been
don't think
all-
that can be considered to be a victory.
Both Koreas could beat North Korea. You know,
Oh, yeah,
it
exactly.
could have been worse.
Okay, but
It
what
could
would
have been.
happen to Mali if everybody had stayed out? What would have happened?
Yeah,
It
but,
would lead to
okay,
another-
stop
oh, yeah.
spanning. But this is my point. Okay, why is it that, for example, in Syria, there has been no military intervention? And why is it in Mali that the French are going in there? I don't understand it. And I think that the argument that Ani put forward, that, or it may have been you, I apologize if I've got it wrong, that support of the previous colonized countries that they had is not really one that is particularly persuasive, because the French were, I think, more, they colonized Algeria more than they did Mali, and they're not playing a slightest bit of interest in any conflicts in Algeria that are taking place at the moment. So why is it that they seem committed to Mali? I don't understand it.
Because it's a matter of the current... Okay, number one, it's economy. Number two, it's the government. They have barely managed to get a secular democracy in there. And now they see everything being threatened by a couple of insurgents going in there from the north. Because the people that brought the arms up, down from Libya, people who are trained, they are all gathering now in Mali, because it's like a safe haven for them. The whole north of Mali has been controlled by Islam, by Al-Qaeda. And this is why they're saying, okay, it's going to be the next route or the next nest or whatever. So they are making it an issue of going into Mali now.
Okay. Leaving Iraq aside, because I think that we can all agree that George Bush is an idiot and that his intervention in Iraq was not called for, at least at the time. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So let's just leave that aside, because this is we're talking about I don't know. Maybe he's less than half a chromosome away from a monkey or something, but he's obviously that was a blunder when it happened. Okay. Let's take the two cases of Syria and Mali.
No, you cannot compare them.
Well, I'm talking about, you're talking about today. Why are they not? The question that DPR just asked: why are they not intervening in Syria or Algeria, let's say, and they're intervening in Mali? Okay. In the case, we'll take Algeria and Mali because they're both French. From what I understand, the Algerians don't really want the French there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but if I'm not mistaken, they hate the French and they fought them bitterly towards the end. I think that in Mali at this point, they don't hate the French. They've asked them for help, and I don't see why they shouldn't help them. I think that if Algerians asked the French for help and the French complied, I wouldn't see anything wrong with that. However, I don't think that that's the case. I don't think the Algerians are asking the French for help or asking them to come and invade and intervene in that way. And so why would you expect the French to go where they're not wanted and not go where they are wanted?
But this is what I don't understand. Why are they wanted in Mali? Well, I can see why they may be wanted, but why are they responding to that? Because normally they don't give a flying fuck about the rest of the world.
But I just said why. Because why not? Right? They're allies,
if
right?
If you're on the internet, then that's tough. It'll be off soon.
Plus, you really don't want another failed state in Mali, and that's not. I mean, it's not unheard of for a state in Africa to go failed when Islamists say.
Yes, but okay. Let me broaden the question then, if I may. What is it about the idea of self-determination that stops us intervening in Syria and doesn't in Mali? And look at what happened in Sudan.
I don't think that's what it is.
Interfered in Sudan, and eventually self-determination produced North Sudan and South Sudan. No, why not just leave it to them to sort it out for themselves?
I think that's what they're doing in Syria.
Agenda, because France does have an agenda with Islam. France sees its integrity, internal integrity, threatened by Islam, and that is why they are taking a very, very hard stance towards Islam. Whereas in Syria, it's an internal thing. It's not Islam against somebody else, which is the case in Mali. And that is why they're trying to take a very, very... They're trying to send a message and saying, don't fuck with us. And that is all they're trying to do, to show Islam that there is no way that they are going to, in any way, buckle under when it comes to any kind of armed conflict.
I think that you guys are taking the Islam...
Islam is not a nation.
No, you know what
really
this
what
is
they're doing is they're sending a message to Muslims.
Yes.
Didn't the French intervene in another African country like a few years ago after the election? I forget the name of the country. What is it?
In Congo.
No, it wasn't Congo. It was where the civil war broke out over the Ivory Coast, and no Islam, and the French intervened because the government asked them the legitimate government asked them for help, and Islam wasn't involved at all there. So
I don't know. I'm just looking at Mali.
No, it's absurd to say that it's about Islam because the French have intervened in Africa when Islam was nowhere to be found. When an ally's legitimate government asked for help, the French helped.
When was this?
Everyone, stop for a second. Now, stop. When you're saying this, is this your own argument, or are you still referring to the conspiracy theorists that you were talking to?
No. I'm past the conspiracy theory. I'm now saying that there is a real motive behind it that they are looking at Islam, because I know that there's a huge threat being perceived in France internally from Muslims.
Well, but hang on.
I have friends in Paris.
I think you're making a serious category error because, I'm looking at. To be fair, I'm looking at the CIA fact book, which no doubt was written by the same Jews that your Muslim acquaintances on that forum were talking about. But if it's to be trusted, Mali is overwhelmingly Muslim, and this, from what I've understood, is primarily northern ethnicities versus southern ethnicities. Although certainly the northern tribes have in some cases announced amicable relations with Al-Qaeda and other militants, and they wrap themselves in a lot of Islamist rhetoric. But it is ultimately Muslims fighting another group of Muslims. Although one faction is certainly putting a lot more stock in religious rhetoric.
Yeah, but now hang on, Muslims. There's another thing. You need to look at the term Muslims now, and you need to understand that there's a whole lot of different groups of Muslims. What Muslims don't tell you is that there are a hell of a lot of Sufis. There's a hell of a lot of different groups of Muslims. I can't even remember all the different groups that are in Mali. So it's not only Muslims as such, but it's a whole load of different ethnicities that are fighting each other because they're different Muslim groups.
The Ivory Coast last year, no Muslims involved. Allies with France. France gets a call for help. They go in. They militarily intervene to help their allies keep a secular democracy going. Nothing to do with Islam. It is absurd to then turn around when they do the same exact thing in another African country that has the call of a civilized, of a secular democracy, legitimate government asks for help, and we say they shouldn't intervene just because they're Muslims. I think that is racist or discrimination.
Okay, that sounds
Mali's not. Mali has the death penalty for freaking apostasy and homosexuality.
Well,
how is Mali secular?
I mean, but
oh, okay. Well, if you want to pick bones,
it's a democracy. It is a democracy in Africa. Well, I mean, I wouldn't take Ivory Coast as the model of civil democracy either. Okay, but the case still stands that if you've got a legitimate elected government that calls your ally and asks for help, it makes no sense why they would intervene in Ivory Coast
this is my point, Ali. This is my point, if I may. This is my point. Why is it that you refer to these countries as allies of France? Because France, as I say, throughout history has shown itself to act utterly independently and in its own self-interest. And I'm presuming from what Stopspamming is saying, that in this case it's a economic interest that it is seeking to protect. And I agree with you, it's got very little to do with religion. That's what it is, it's economics, not religion.
Okay, that may be the case, but certainly cries of Islamophobia wouldn't help you in this case.
They're doing it anyway.
Stopspamming said that it was about
being
Muslims.
Stop was joking about the Islamophobia thing.
No. I was serious about the Islamophobia because this is what is actually happening. People are accusing me when I say to them, hang on guys, there could be another reason for all of this. I don't think it's economic because, I mean, let's face it, Mali is one of the poorest countries in the world. So I think it must be something else. It must be emotional in some way. Yeah, but if I say there might be another explanation for all this, I am being I am being accused of Islamophobia because I'm not feeling sorry for the poor Muslims that are being slaughtered there.
Now, as soon as they say that, you should then say, then why did they go to Ivory Coast and help put down a civil war there?
That's a good point.
Islam has got nothing to do with this. May have something to do with economics. I don't know what the economics between France and Mali and Ivory Coast is, but I'll tell you what I do know is it's not about religion.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical of the claim that this is about France showing Muslims whatever. Like I think that's.
I think you can make sense about the hijab.
It's just too foolish. What French military leaders would go, you know what we should do? We should show Like, I get inside France, there's a lot of pressure and some issues, and social conservatives are really concerned about hijab and stuff, and I get that. But what French military leaders go, okay, let's teach Muslims all over the world a lesson by intervening to help the government of Mali. It just seems like it just seems really implausible to me. I think that unless there is unless you can point to an actual like correspondence or something where that's actually admitted by French military leaders, I'm going to say that it's more likely that it's to do with African politics and economics. And
I think you guys are Frenchophobia.
You guys are forgetting. It's all the Jews. The French didn't even want to do this.
Oh, come on.
That is what the person...
The French have a long history of kowtowing to the Jews, don't they? Like the Dreyfus affair.
The person you were arguing with, wasn't that really what they originally, in all seriousness, proposed, is that the French didn't even want to do this, the Jews put them up to it, right? So that they could get uranium, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's an easier way to get uranium other than go to all this trouble. I mean, it seems like okay, you just use proxies and you buy or steal it. It's like that movie Avatar where they're trying to get that unobtainium. I thought, why don't they just do like a slant mining thing, just dig under the tree and get it instead of bothering with the locals at all? I think that's something like that. So they should just. The Jews should just use their underground bases and build a giant tunneling machine and just go get the uranium, and the people on the surface will be none the wiser. That's what I think.
Okay,
or
what
just
is
train
the
the sharks.
What is the motive? What is the motive?
I don't know, but I want to defend the French on the hijab thing, okay? Because it's not the hijab, it's the niqab.
Okay, I'm going to take the rest offline.
No, it's the niqab that they have a problem with, and there is a perfectly legitimate security reason why you don't want people covered up walking around in your streets. In the United States, if you walk around with a mask on your face, the police can tell you to remove your mask because they don't know if you're going to go rob a bank or whatever. And you have to have an ID on you. Look, if we're going to live in a society and we're going to have to worry about safety concerns, then it's perfectly legitimate to ask people to show at least their faces in public.
Okay, but let's be honest though. I mean, this was largely a reaction not towards masks of all kinds. I mean, it was targeted, and I really disagree with France. I was really taken aback when they enacted that law. I have to go on record opposing it. They say, okay, well, this is. I mean, they have various pretenses, but let's face it. This is. These are laws brought about because of, targeting a particular sector of the population.
No, I don't think the law says niqab. I just think the law just says covering your face in public.
Right? Yeah, I understand.
So I think that's not a good point to make because they don't say just niqab.
They were prudent about the way they worded the law, but let's face it, the push came about for a particular reason. And I think like if you get pulled over by a police officer and he says, "Look, I'm going to need to check your your face to see if it matches the ID," fine. But beyond that sort of that immediate concern, I don't think that banning things of that nature, especially in the climate and for the motive that I feel was really behind it, I don't think is justified. I was really surprised. I mean, the United States, you do have a lot of kind of wacko anti-Muslim bigots, but even then, the political climate and the protections in place are such that it's unthinkable that a law would be passed like that. You just can't deny that it is targeted at a particular group. I mean, the argument could be made that it has wider applications, but...
Right. I mean, I get that you're saying this, that it was targeted against because Muslim women were doing this, and I think that that's perfectly fine. If you've got a whole group of people who think that they're going to walk around and cover their face everywhere, Okay,
Yeah.
I think it's legitimate to then create a law to combat that because you don't want people walking around with their faces covered.
To me, I got that little libertarian streak that says that's invading someone's personal life too much. I mean,
Can I offer a nuanced opinion?
Yeah, it's too invasive. It's too invasive. I don't think.
I think that I should be able to wear a burqa if I wanted to anywhere right around, but the moment if the police want to, they can force me to take that off so they can identify me. If I'm entering a bank, I have to take it off so people can see my face. If I'm going anywhere, like somewhere where I could be using it to rob someone, I have to take it off. Or if asked by an authority figure to show my ID or something, I have to take it off.
Someone in the chat took issue with me saying it's an abuse of women's rights, not a personal issue. But here's the thing:
it's tough.
The whole point
we
is
can't tell if a woman is being pressured to or not.
I can't catch my breath. It's an abuse of women's rights.
No, she's saying she's saying that the burqa often is. She's referring to people who are being, pressured to wear.
That's like saying,
but that's the whole point
for the Jews to wear their funny little hats on their head, like the little square one and stuff. You could say that's an abuse of I don't know, whatever. I mean, it's too bad. We can't force them not to do it. If their culture and their society and they're pressuring them to do it, you can't stop that.
No, but if Jews were wearing something that covered their entire face, you'd have a perfectly legitimate reason to make a law banning covering your face if there was a bunch of them walking around covering their face, some of them walking into places and blowing themselves up and all that stuff.
Well,
then I think you've got a perfectly legitimate reason to say, no, you can't cover your face. We need to know who you are when you're walking around.
The blowing yourself
And also, Almighty, I have to remind you, Almighty, if I may, that there was a wonderful occasion where a failed suicide bomber, a male, actually sought to get out of the country by wearing a burqa and getting on a plane under a false identity of being a woman. I'm sorry, in such circumstances, to say that you can't.
Yeah, but you're talking about you're talking about authorities checking someone. That's different from never being allowed to wear a face covering in public. You understand? And I understand that people, in many cases, many apologists for religion vehemently deny it. They say, "Oh no, they all do it as a show of dedication to their God." But that's bullshit. They are under a lot of pressure, but we have to push for a consistent standard of choice. Choose to wear, choose not to wear. Oppose anyone who goes for a strictly authoritarian stance on this. And I think that in terms of there are. I do think that for compliance with the law, you should. A police officer should be able to check your ID. You should get a photo ID that does have your face. You should show your face if there is some pressing security concern, but I don't think that, widely speaking, that's necessarily the case, and I don't think that the majority of women wearing the niqab. What is even the ratio among militants? What is really the ratio of female participation? I know that there is some globally.
In France, there were only 8,000 women who were wearing the burqa.
Well, but how many of those were actively involved in the kind of security problems that?
No, what I'm saying is that it wasn't really an issue in France. It was in France. It was definitely just a political thing. Like, oh, the burqa. It wasn't widespread. Most people will never see a woman wearing, it's unlikely they'll even see a woman wearing a burqa in their entire life.
Yeah, so I think it really was a reactionary thing. It's kind of an indication of the climate.
A culture war.
Yeah, it's an indication of the climate and how the Muslim immigrant population and the native population of Europe are really getting on each other's nerves and grating on each other. And I personally hope no offense to any European Muslims, but I would expect and hope that rates of immigration into Europe from Muslim countries were drastically reduced just so that the tension can pass. You know what I mean? Because if you have more and more people getting off the boat, it just exacerbates the situation. Of course, if you're born in Algeria, you move to France, and you like it there a lot more, obviously that it might be kind of frightening to think that you didn't have that opportunity. But I think that really slowing the rate of immigration and allowing the people to become accustomed to each other would be a good idea. You know what I mean? It would ease some of that pressure. But I mean, I cannot support the banning the burqa or niqab outright unless there was a much more immediate and demonstrable security benefit, and I don't think that there is. We keep losing Klingschor.
Yeah, I think we've veered off this topic so many times in this.
Yes,
it's going to be hard to make up what the topic was.
If I may, I wanted to bring it back on topic, particularly if Klingschor is with us, but he's
no,
not.
He seems to have dropped. What were you going to ask?
Well, let me throw out the question anyway, because Ali probably would be able to. Well, in fact, I had a question for you, which was somewhat different. Going back to the Islamophobia issue, you stated earlier that you rightfully feared this religion or ideology because they wanted to kill you. Now, what I am puzzled by here is your use of the word they, because I think that you would accept that the majority of Muslims do not want to kill you, and I presume the reason that you're saying that they do is because of your apostasy. If I'm wrong about that, you can correct me. But this is one of the problems that I keep on going back to. It is very difficult, in my view, to identify exactly what the ideology of Islam is, because there are so many different strains and sects of it that one group of Muslims might believe in something totally different. And whilst it may say in the Quran, and I wish I could say it in the same way that Klingschor does, but in the Quran that apostasy is worthy of the death penalty, the majority of Muslims, I suspect, do not adhere to that view, much like the majority of Christians.
You'd be wrong for thinking that.
Okay, tell me, explain to me.
Well, I mean, for one thing, when people in, let's say, we'll take any case of recent accusations of blasphemy or things like that, it's usually the majority of the people living there that create a lynch mob and go after these people. In Egypt, you can't find 5% who say atheists should be allowed to leave Islam. You couldn't find 5% to agree to that. Okay, and so to say it's not a majority is to make a mistake, because the overwhelming majority of Muslims, at least from in my country of birth, Egypt, are perfectly fine with jailing and killing atheists. A Christian family just got 15 years in jail for apostatizing, and guess what? Majority of people are okay with that. Opinion polls are fine. They show, yeah, atheists should definitely be jailed or killed. So to say that a majority don't is just outright wrong. That's the first thing. The second thing is about they. Now, well, obviously,
just before you move on, let's just deal with that point. Obviously, I know some Muslims in this country. I don't know any that have openly expressed the idea.
Well, they're not the majority of Muslims, though.
Well, I accept that, but
I mean, they're certainly less than 5%, probably, most likely.
Well, in Egypt, you would say. I suspect.
Well, I'm talking about Muslims as the entire population of people who call themselves Muslim. Okay, the people that you talk about.
I think your next point probably follows on, and I shouldn't have interrupted you. When you say they, pick it up from there.
Yeah. So when I say they, obviously I should have. It was me misspeaking, because what I was talking about there was the ideology. So when I say they, that was a mistake. I was talking about the fear of the ideology that says that I should be killed. Now, you said, well, there are different interpretations of Muslim. I subscribe to the interpretation that most Muslims subscribe to, okay? Because I'm not interested in weeding out, who said and where. I'm interested in what Muslims themselves think, okay? So what do the majority of Muslims think? There are very popular schools that most Muslims self-identify as being ascribed to. And in those schools of thought, apostasy is punishable. by death, by jail. It doesn't you can now. I wanted to actually make a point here before I finish this. There's such a thing as making a statement so specific that it becomes meaningless, right? I could say I'm gonna go to the beach tomorrow unless it rains, right? Now, there are many other things that can stop me from going to the beach, so I can sit there and say, well, I'm going to go to the beach tomorrow if it doesn't rain and my car doesn't break down and my wife doesn't get sick and my cousin doesn't have, okay? But that's not really going to be very helpful to anybody, right? And then I could make the statement, well, I'll go to the beach unless I don't, right? And that doesn't say anything. So in order to have some meaning, you're going to have to make some generalizations and omit some exceptions. All right, or otherwise you're just never going to get anywhere. So the point that I'm making is that yes, of course, that there are some Muslims that don't and some mazhabs that don't and all that other good stuff that and you should obviously treat every person as an individual, and you can't generalize on the individual level. All right, but you can say that if 95% of people self-identify as this, you can then make some generalizations about this. All right, it's not unheard of because you got to make some decisions. All right, and as far as I see it, 95% of Muslims worldwide, okay, subscribe to the idea that apostates should be killed. Now, you can say yes, some Western Muslims they don't think this way. And okay, I agree with you, but when we're talking about Muslims, that's like less than 1%. So what are we talking about, really?
Yeah.
I mean, there's such a thing as making too many nuances and rendering your statements useless.
Yeah, the thing is, if you took some admittedly liberal Muslims from Berkeley and Manhattan, and many of them will say, oh, well, ours is the true Islam, and the vast majority of the more orthodox-minded, they're doing it wrong. Well, I mean, let's face it. You can go round and round about specific points of doctrine, but as far as which mentality would win out if there was a giant forum set up and a decision made, which doctrine would ultimately prevail, then taking the Berkeley and Manhattan Muslims and adding them to the global diaspora, it's like taking some ice shavings and expecting it to cool down a giant vat of boiling water. So I mean there are some a few individuals who a lot of the guests we've had on the show, they're really nice people who are just absolutely bullshitting themselves about what the teachings of their religion actually are, and they just say, well, whatever my conscience tells me is right, that's what the Quran was really trying to say. And we're grateful that they have that mentality at least. It would be better if they broke orbit from the doctrine completely, but
I just want to be absolutely clear before people go and say all that. You should never, ever look at a Muslim as anything other than an individual. Okay, but I need to make factual statements about the situation that we see today. All right, and the way that it is, and this is just a fact. Okay, when you look at polls in any Muslim country, this is what you get. All right, they want atheists jailed or killed. Nobody should be able to leave Islam. They say this time and time again. They show their support for it time and time again, and so. Me saying that doesn't mean that every time you look at a Muslim, you should see them as an atheist-hating bigot. But what I'm saying is that if we're going to make some meaningful statements about what Islam is and what the majority of Muslims think, then these are accurate statements to make.
I have no problem with generalizations. Indeed, I would go so far as to say you can't have a really sensible conversation without making some degree of generalizations. Secondly, I would also want to give a shout out on the Magic Sunway show tomorrow for the person that you referred to, who I'm terribly sorry I've forgotten his name, the person that's been arrested in Kuwait, which I saw the things discussed with a few people, I think yourself included, in setting up the change.org petition to help him. So if you could send me the details of that, I will certainly love to publicise that tomorrow. and see what we can do to support him. I totally agree with you, but I didn't think, and if you are correct, I stand corrected, and I appreciate you correcting me. I didn't think it was as much as 95%.
Right. Obviously, I'm not giving you an exact number, but certainly the majority. I mean, there's no question about the majority, right? 95% may be obviously a bit too far here, but it's nowhere near a majority of Muslims that think atheists should be let go. And to say that is just absolutely factually nowhere near reality. You could say that there is certainly a really small minority that think that, but nowhere near even a big minority.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it seems like there's such a climate of fear on this issue. Nobody wants to be different. Nobody wants to stand up and say, "Hey guys, I think that we shouldn't kill atheists." Nobody wants to be that person. Otherwise, they think who but an atheist would say that. Reminds me, I think it was like one of the Simpsons where there's aliens talking, and they're like, "Maybe we should all just calm down." And someone points a gun at him and says, "That's alien talk. He's an alien." I mean, it's. You have people who are just have it drummed up into their head that there's just nothing you could do that is worse. I mean, to be an unbeliever is bad enough, but to be to betray the religion, to betray God. I mean, what could you do that is lower? I mean, when you have that drummed in all the time, and or another Matt Groening reference. It reminds me. I don't know if you guys watch Futurama. There's this planet of the robots, and they go around looking for humans to kill. But there hasn't been a human on the planet for years and years. But they just have it. They're so thoroughly scapegoated. You know what I mean? And so it is with apostates. I mean, they're even the worse than unbelievers in this culture. So if you're quietly in your little M. Night Shyamalan type world. You know, you're the only person in the village who thinks, hey, maybe the people from some other world, they're not so bad. Maybe these others that we keep vilifying. You have to have a lot of courage to say that, and you're probably going to regret it if you do take a stand. So, I mean,
yes, I totally agree with that.
It'd be hard to really identify once and for all how many people think this way, because the climate is such that I think people of conscience would be terrified to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't jail or kill people.
I agree, and then the point that I was seeking to make was to record a conversation to which you were party on the Magic Summit show when we had Hamza Sortzis on the show. And it took some time, and it sounds as if I'm totally changing my position, which in a way I kind of am, I guess, who has lived in this country for many years, who works for a institution that has charitable status, and after a lot of time of questioning, he eventually accepted that the death penalty for apostasy was appropriate, and beheading by the sword was a useful method of imposing the death penalty because, to quote him directly, at least it's painless.
Yeah, you did see him struggle with that, because he can't go on record saying that it's not allowed or justified. He can try to dodge the question as best he can, but he cannot go on record by anything that would ultimately be viewed by his supporters saying, "Oh no, we shouldn't kill him." He can't go on.
Well, he could. They just call him an apostate and try to kill him. That's always an option that you have.
It's not a logical. It doesn't follow logically, though, does it? Just because you say. You could say I'm a devout Muslim except for this one point. In much as many Christians say I'm a devout Christian except when it comes to gay people or whatever. But
we've seen,
you see
but they don't do that.
Christians who do say I accept homosexuals. He could say I accept apostates. In fact, he tried desperately to argue that he did, but eventually he was cornered, and as you say, cultural pressures on him.
It's that sort of a witch hunt or Red Scare type environment. Who would be soft on communism but a closet communist? That kind of thing.
The problem I took issue with what you said, DPR, is because you hear this kind of thing all the time, right? Is the majority of Muslims don't think that they That's not true. Where are people getting these numbers? They overwhelmingly in everywhere that is of any consequence, overwhelmingly say that they want to kill the apostates. They overwhelmingly say that they hate Jews. So what are we talking about? I mean, it baffles me when people good. I mean, obviously, I understand why good-meaning people would like to think that, but it's just not true. The fact says that that's not actually what they think, for the most part. And again, they, when I'm talking about they here, let me make sure that I reiterate again, because I know that people will say this. Every person should be treated individually. I'm talking about in majorities of all Muslim populations. Okay, majorities of all Muslim populations overwhelmingly have said over and over again that is what they think.
Well, okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. We're an hour over time.
DPR, did you have one last question about the Quran?
No, he doesn't. Thank you for
Yes, I
everyone.
do, but it's Almighty's show or your show,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'll leave it for a future occasion. We'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah,
very
thank you
well.
everyone for participating, and thank you in advance, DPR, for helping us bring awareness to Ali's associate who's been
Hey,
jailed.
can I just plug Aziz before?
One more time.
Yep. So everybody in the chat, I'm going to paste a link now for a Facebook page that has a petition and some information about a friend of mine, somebody who is on a panel show that's in Arabic that talks about Islam, and we kind of do what we did now, but in Arabic. And he's been jailed in Kuwait for blasphemy because of his part on the show and his writings against Islam. And we're asking everybody to go on, like the page, and sign the petition and share it as widely as you can. We think that the country of Kuwait can be pressured into letting him go, and all your help would be much appreciated. So please, I've just posted the link. Go on, like the page, sign the petition, tell all your friends.
Right, and just quick before we go, Ali, you said that there's widespread hatred with Muslims against atheists and Jews. Now, I mean, I don't think that we atheists we're pretty harmless, most of them. But I mean, I can't fault Muslims for disliking Jews. If there was a group of people who were attacking my people with French sharks trained to steal our uranium, don't you think that the anger would be justified? I mean, look, that's just despicable.
and guys, you can find the Gin and Tonic Show on Twitter, Facebook, and iTunes as well.
According to the Egyptian president, Jews are descended from pigs and monkeys.
What?
Yeah, the Egyptian president. There's
Which
video
has a
of him,
basis in the Quran.
which does have a basis in the Quran.
On that gem.
So, yeah, but where? How did they make an alliance with the land sharks? How did anyway? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, let's just end it.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. So long.